I know hopeless romantic sounds naive to some people, like it means you don't understand how the world works, but that's not true. A hopeless romantic isn't someone who ignores reality. It's someone who sees it clearly and still chooses love anyway. It's knowing how badly love can hurt and still believing it's worth it. I don't believe in love because I think it's easy. I believe in it because I know how rare it is when it's real. Being a hopeless romantic means you don't just want someone, you want connection. You want the kind of love where attention doesn't wander, where effort isn't forced, where choosing each other feels natural, not strategic. You want late night talks that don't feel rushed, silence that feels comfortable. Inside jokes no one else understands. You want to build a world with one person and let the rest fade into the background? And yeah, you know the risk. You know love can leave scars. You know it can change you. You know it can take pieces of you that don't come back the same. But being a hopeless romantic means you'd rather feel deeply than live safely. You don't want love that's casual. You don't want to act detached. You don't want to pretend you wouldn't be devastated to lose someone you care about. You want to care. You want to choose someone fully and mean it. No exits, no backups, no pretending you're less invested than you are. And that's what makes it hard sometimes, because the world rewards indifference. It praises being unbothered. It treats emotional distance like maturity. So when you show up soft, present, intentional, people call you too much, but you're not too much. You're just not built for shallow love. A hopeless romantic doesn't love this way because they're weak. They love this way because they're brave enough to risk being hurt for something that actually matters. You're not chasing a fantasy. You're chasing alignment, the kind of love that feels steady, not chaotic, intense but safe, deep but mutual. And even if it takes longer, even if you have to wait, even if you get hurt along the way, you don't regret loving like this, because a life without love feels smaller than a life with heartbreak. So no, you won't grow out of it. You won't harden. You won't stop wanting something real. You're a hopeless romantic because you refuse to let the world convince you that love should be shallow, casual, or disposable. And one day, someone will meet you in that same place. They won't laugh at your softness. They won't flinch at your depth. They won't ask you to tone it down. They'll recognize it, and that's when you'll realize you were never hopeless. You were just holding out for something worth believing in. Being a hopeless romantic doesn't mean you believe love will save you. It means you believe it's worth showing up for. It means you don't enter connections casually. You don't date out of boredom. You don't give your heart halfway just to say you tried. When you love, you mean it. You pay attention. You remember small things. You imagine futures without realizing you're doing it. Not because you're delusional, but because that's how your mind works. You see potential where others see risk, and you know that scares people. Some people love with limits, with conditions, with an exit already planned. You don't. You love with the intention to stay if it's right. That's why breakups hit you harder. That's why disappointment lingers longer. That's why you take time to heal. Because when you commit emotionally, you don't do it lightly. People tell you to protect your heart, to be less invested, to stop giving so much. But they don't understand. Loving deeply isn't something you can switch off. It's how you experience the world. You feel things fully. Music hits harder, memories stick longer, connection means more, and yes, that makes life heavier sometimes, but it also makes it meaningful. You don't want love that feels replaceable. You don't want someone who treats you like an option among many. You want to be chosen the same way you choose, intentionally, fully, without hesitation. And until that exists, you'd rather be alone than half present in something shallow. That's the part people miss. A hopeless romantic isn't desperate for love. They're selective. They'd rather wait than cheapen the way they love just to fit in. So when you say you're a hopeless romantic, what you really mean is you still believe connection matters. You still believe loyalty is rare. You still believe love should feel like home, not like a negotiation. And even after heartbreak, after disappointment, after learning how badly love can hurt, you don't shut down, you slow down. You heal. You keep your heart intact because the world already has enough people who don't care. What it doesn't have enough of are people willing to love honestly without pretending it's easy. And that's not weakness, that's conviction. Being a hopeless romantic isn't about expecting perfection. It's about refusing to treat love like something disposable. It's knowing that connection is rare and not watering it down just to seem unaffected. You don't fall for people easily, but when you do, it's intentional. You don't love out of loneliness, you love out of recognition. There's a moment where you see someone, not just who they are, but who they could be with you, and something in you locks in, not obsession, not fantasy, commitment, and that's where people misunderstand you. They think you're idealizing, they think you're rushing, they think you're setting yourself up to get hurt, but what they don't see is how much restraint it takes to love like this in a world that treats feelings like liabilities. You know how badly it can go. You've felt the disappointment, the silence, the slow realization that someone didn't choose you the way you chose them, and still, you don't turn cold, you don't reduce love to strategy, you don't keep score, you don't enter connections with a backup plan. Because loving halfway feels worse to you than losing someone you loved fully. You want the kind of love that's unmistakable, where effort doesn't fluctuate, where intentions don't need decoding, where loyalty isn't treated like something rare or surprising. You want love that's steady, not loud, not chaotic, not anxiety disguised as excitement, just real. And yes, that means you get hurt deeper, because when you love, you're all the way in. You don't protect yourself by caring less. You protect yourself by choosing carefully. That's the difference. A hopeless romantic isn't reckless. They're discerning. They'd rather be alone than share space with someone who makes them feel like they're asking for too much just by wanting honesty, effort, and presence. And if that means waiting longer, so be it. Because you're not waiting for attention. You're waiting for alignment. For someone who doesn't flinch at your depth, who doesn't joke about your softness, who doesn't need you to tone it down to make things easier. Someone who sees the way you love and says, good, I do too. So no, you won't stop being a hopeless romantic, not because you haven't learned, but because you've learned exactly what it costs and you've decided it's still worth it. Being a hopeless romantic means you don't know how to love a little. You either feel it or you don't. And when you feel it, it changes the way you move. You start noticing the small things, the way someone texts you when they're busy, the way they remember what you said weeks ago, the way they look at you when you're not trying, and you don't call that doing too much, you call that real. But the world tries to train that out of you. It tells you to be chill, to act like you don't care, to keep your feelings locked up until someone earns them. So you try to play that role, you try to be distant, try to be casual, try to treat love like it's just another thing, and it never works, because that's not who you are. You don't want a connection where you're constantly guessing. You don't want to be with someone who makes loyalty feel rare. You don't want a love that only shows up when it's convenient. You want the kind of love that feels chosen, not maybe, not we'll see, not I'm not sure, chosen. And sometimes that's what makes it lonely, because you keep meeting people who like the attention, but don't respect the intention. People who love the way you make them feel, but don't want to carry the responsibility of caring back, so you end up doing the hardest thing for someone like you. You walk away, not because you stopped loving, but because you finally realized love shouldn't require you to beg for consistency. A hopeless romantic doesn't stay where they're confused. They don't keep giving their heart to someone who treats it like something optional. They'd rather be alone than feel lonely next to someone, and that's not weakness, that's standards. Because if you love deeply, you have to protect that depth, not by becoming cold, but by becoming honest about what you need, and what you need is simple: presence, effort, loyalty, clarity. The kind of love that doesn't make you question yourself for wanting something real. What hurts the most as a hopeless romantic isn't rejection. It's realizing someone enjoyed being loved by you, but never intended to love you the same way. They like the attention, the consistency, the way you showed up without hesitation, but when it came time to match that energy, to choose you with the same certainty, they hesitated, and that hesitation sticks with you because you don't love casually, you don't give pieces of yourself without meaning to. So when someone accepts your love without offering clarity in return, it feels like betrayal, even if they never promised anything. That's the quiet pain of being a hopeless romantic. You assume people love the way you do, with intention, with follow-through, with the understanding that feelings carry weight, and when they don't, you start questioning yourself. Am I asking for too much? Am I moving too fast? Am I wrong for wanting something solid? But the truth is, you weren't wrong. You were just loving someone who didn't have the same capacity. Some people like being cared for more than they like caring back. They want the benefits of your depth without the responsibility of meeting it, and learning that forces you to grow. Not by loving less, but by loving smarter. You start paying attention to actions, to consistency, to whether someone shows up when it's easy and when it's inconvenient. You stop pouring into people who only give when it suits them, not because you've become colder, but because you've learned your heart isn't something everyone deserves access to. Being a hopeless romantic doesn't mean you accept crumbs. It means you believe in love enough to walk away when it's not being returned honestly. And that's the part people don't see. Your softness comes with strength. Your depth comes with discernment, because loving deeply also means knowing when to stop. Being a hopeless romantic means waiting doesn't scare you. Settling does. You've seen what happens when people accept love that's almost right. They grow quieter, they grow distant, they start convincing themselves that good enough is enough, and you know that could never be you. You don't want a relationship that slowly drains you. You don't want love that feels like compromise from the very beginning. So you wait, not because you think you're better than anyone else, but because you know yourself. You know how deeply you attach, how fully you commit, how once your heart is in, it doesn't wander. And you also know what happens when that kind of heart ends up in the wrong hands. It gets taken for granted, it gets tested, it gets stretched until it starts hurting more than it should. So patience becomes protection. You don't rush intimacy. You don't force connection. You let people show you who they are before you give them access to who you are. That's not fear, that's wisdom earned the hard way. Some days the waiting feels heavy. You watch people pair off quickly. You hear about relationships that just happened. You wonder if maybe you're overthinking things, but deep down you know the truth. You're not waiting for attention, you're waiting for alignment, for someone who doesn't flinch when things get real, who doesn't pull back when feelings deepen, who doesn't treat commitment like a loss of freedom. You want someone who stays present, who chooses you clearly, who doesn't make you question whether you're asking for too much, because to you, love isn't supposed to feel confusing. It's supposed to feel steady, and until that exists, being alone is still better than being half-loved. That's the quiet strength of being a hopeless romantic. You don't chase, you don't beg, you don't lower your standards just to say you're not alone. You wait, not because you're hopeless, but because you believe the right love won't require you to betray yourself. People like you feel things more intensely, not because you're dramatic, but because you're present. When something matters to you, it doesn't sit quietly in the background, it moves through you, it stays with you. Love doesn't just pass through your life, it marks it. That's why moments linger longer, why memories feel heavier, why connections don't fade easily once they've mattered. And people tell you that's a problem. They say you should care less, detach quicker, move on faster. But they don't understand what intensity really is. Intensity isn't chaos, it isn't instability, it isn't losing control. It's depth. It's the ability to feel joy fully and grief honestly, to experience connection without numbing yourself just to make it easier. You You don't skim life, you dive into it. And that's why love feels different to you than it does to most people. You don't forget easily, you don't replace people quickly, you don't treat connection like something interchangeable. When you love, it's intentional. That's why heartbreak hits harder. Because you didn't hold back, you didn't love with conditions, you didn't prepare an exit in advance, you showed up honestly. And while that hurts more in the moment, it also means something important. Nothing about your love was fake. You don't look back wondering if you tried hard enough, if you cared enough, if you were too guarded. You know you gave what you had, and that kind of certainty matters. Intensity becomes a problem only when it's given to the wrong people. With the right person, your depth won't feel overwhelming, it'll feel grounding. They won't ask you to tone it down. They won't joke about you caring too much. They won't treat your feelings like something they need to manage. They'll meet you there, because the truth is, the world doesn't need fewer people who feel deeply. It needs more people who aren't afraid to. And being a hopeless romantic means you refuse to apologize for having a heart that actually shows up. At some point, you learn how to guard your heart without becoming guarded. That's a hard balance for someone like you, because you don't want to turn cold. You don't want to love halfway. You don't want to build walls so high that nothing real can get in. But you also know what happens when you give too much, too soon, to someone who doesn't know how to hold it. So you change, not by loving less, but by loving slower. You stop giving access before effort is proven. You stop filling in the gaps when someone shows you inconsistency. You stop romanticizing potential over behavior, and that doesn't feel natural at first, because you're used to leading with your heart, used to giving people the benefit of the doubt, used to assuming good intentions. But experience teaches you something important. Being open doesn't mean being unprotected. You can still be warm without being available to everyone. You can still be deep without drowning in the wrong places. So you watch, you listen, you notice who shows up consistently and who only appears when it's convenient. You let people reveal themselves instead of rushing to explain them. And that's when your love becomes safer, not smaller. You're still a hopeless romantic. You still believe in connection. You still want that kind of love where effort feels mutual and presence feels natural. But now, you don't mistake interest for intention. You don't confuse words with commitment. You don't chase clarity, you wait to see it. And that patience isn't fear, it's respect for yourself, because you finally understand that the right person won't need you to rush your heart to keep them close. They'll move at a pace that protects what you're building together. And when you feel that, you won't have to second guess it. You'll know. There's a phase every hopeless romantic goes through that feels especially isolating. It's the part where you've learned enough to stop choosing the wrong people, but you haven't met the right one yet. So you're not heartbroken anymore. You're not chasing. You're not settling. You're just alone, and people don't understand that version of you. They assume you've become distant, that you've lost interest, that you've changed, but really you've just stopped forcing connection where it doesn't fit. You're not closed off, you're selective, you're not cold, you're careful. You've reached a place where surface level attention doesn't move you anymore. Small talk feels hollow, inconsistent effort feels loud, mixed signals feel exhausting, so you walk away sooner, you disengage faster, you don't explain yourself as much, and that can feel lonely, because now you're surrounded by people but not met by anyone. You want depth, you want presence, you want someone who doesn't flinch when emotions enter the room, and until that shows up, nothing else feels worth your heart. This is usually the point where people tell you to lower your standards, to be more flexible, to give someone a chance, but they don't understand what it costs you to love the wrong person. They don't feel the aftermath the way you do, the way it lingers, the way it reshapes you. So you hold your ground, even when it feels quiet, even when it feels like you're the only one still believing in something deeper. because you know this loneliness is different from the loneliness you felt before. Before, you were lonely because you were giving your heart to people who couldn't hold it. Now you're lonely because you're protecting it, and that difference matters. This space isn't empty. It's the space right before alignment. The moment right before someone finally sees the way you love and doesn't ask you to soften it. And even though it's hard, even though it tests your patience, you stay here because you know the right love won't arrive while you're busy entertaining the wrong ones. Being a hopeless romantic was never about fantasy. It was about faith. Faith that connection matters, that loyalty still means something, that choosing one person fully isn't outdated, it's intentional. For a long time, you wondered if this way of loving was something you were supposed to grow out of, if heartbreak was meant to harden you, if disappointment was meant to teach you to want less, but it never did. Every time you tried to love casually, it felt wrong. Every time you tried to detach, you felt empty. Because loving deeply was never a habit you picked up. It was part of who you are. You weren't built to love halfway. You weren't meant to treat people like options. You weren't meant to keep one foot out the door just in case. And yes, that made the journey harder. You felt things more intensely. You lost futures you had already imagined. You walked away from people you still cared about because they couldn't meet you where you stood. But none of that was wasted. Every disappointment refined you. Every heartbreak taught you discernment. Every lonely stretch strengthened your standards, not so you'd love less about it, but so you'd love right. Now you understand something clearly. Being a hopeless romantic doesn't mean you ignore reality. It means you face it and still refuse to settle. You don't want perfect love, you want present love. The kind that doesn't confuse you. The kind that doesn't require self-editing. The kind that chooses you with the same certainty you offer in return. And when that finally arrives, it won't feel overwhelming. It won't feel chaotic. It won't feel like something you have to chase. It'll feel calm, mutual, safe. You won't wonder where you stand. You won't question if you're asking for too much. You won't feel like you're loving harder than you're being loved. And in that moment, everything will make sense. All the waiting, all the walking away. All the times you chose being alone over being half-loved. You weren't too much. You were just ahead of your time in a world that forgot how to love with intention. So no, being a hopeless romantic isn't something you need to fix. It's something you protect, because when the right person finally meets you there, they won't try to change you. They'll recognize you. You'll realize you were never hopeless at all. You were just holding out for a love that was worthy of you. Lust will ruin your life if you don't learn how to recognize it for what it really is. Not temptation, not desire, not even attraction. Lust is a signal. It's like a check engine light flashing on your dashboard, warning you that something deeper is wrong under the surface. And most people don't want to hear that. They'd rather numb it, feed it, distract themselves with it, instead of asking why it showed up in the first place. Because here's the truth. When lust starts controlling your thoughts, your habits, your attention, it usually means you're lacking something real in your life. Not sex, not validation, intimacy. And intimacy doesn't always mean romance. That's where a lot of people get it twisted. Intimacy can be connection. It can be purpose. It can be faith. It can be feeling seen by people who actually care about you. It can be having someone you can talk to honestly without pretending you're okay. When those things are missing, lust steps in as a cheap replacement. Gives you a temporary hit, a moment of feeling wanted, a moment of escape, but once that moment passes, you're left emptier than before. That's why lust never satisfies. It promises relief, but delivers restlessness. You indulge, and instead of feeling fulfilled, you feel more hollow, more disconnected, more frustrated with yourself. And then the cycle repeats. Because you're not fixing the problem, you're feeding the symptom. The craving itself isn't the enemy. The lack of awareness is. Lust shows up when you're avoiding something, when you're lonely, when you're stressed, when you're disconnected from yourself. It's your mind trying to fill a void without doing the work to understand why that void exists in the first place. And the more you indulge it without reflection, the more it delays your healing. You tell yourself it's harmless, that it's normal, that everyone does it. But deep down, you know when something isn't sitting right with your spirit. You know when it's no longer about desire and more about escape. This isn't about shame, it's about honesty. Lust is an indicator, a warning sign. A moment where you need to pause and ask yourself, what am I really craving right now? Connection? Comfort? Meaning? Peace? Because until you figure that out, lust will keep pulling you further away from yourself instead of closer to who you're meant to be. Most people don't want to admit this part, but lust usually shows up when you're feeling empty, not when you're fulfilled, when your life feels aligned, when you're grounded, when you have purpose and connection. Lust doesn't scream as loud. It might knock, but it doesn't take over. It only takes control when there's space inside you that hasn't been filled with anything meaningful. That's why lust hits hardest late at night, when you're alone, when the noise dies down, and there's nothing left to distract you from your thoughts. That's when your mind starts looking for something, anything, to feel good for a moment, and lust offers that shortcut. No effort, no vulnerability, no risk of rejection, just instant stimulation. But shortcuts always come with a cost. The more you use lust as an escape, the harder it becomes to sit with yourself. You start avoiding silence, avoiding stillness, avoiding the questions you don't want to answer. You tell yourself you're just satisfying a desire, but really you're training your brain to seek relief instead of growth, comfort instead of clarity. And over time, that changes you. It dulls your motivation. It weakens your discipline. It distorts how you view people, turning them into objects instead of humans. It lowers your tolerance for real connection because real intimacy requires patience, presence, and effort. Things lust never asks of you. This is why people who live in lust often feel stuck, not because they're bad or weak, but because they're constantly numbing the very discomfort that could push them to grow. Pain becomes something to escape instead of something to understand, and healing gets postponed again and again. You have to learn to pause when the urge hits, not to fight it with shame, but to question it. Ask yourself what you're actually missing in that moment. Is it connection, purpose, rest, direction? Because the urge is information, and if you listen to it instead of obeying it, it can lead you to what actually needs attention in your life. Lust loses power the moment you become aware of it. Here's where it gets uncomfortable but important. Lust isn't just about what you want, it's about what you're avoiding. Most people don't struggle with lust because they're overly sexual. They struggle because they're disconnected from themselves, from their purpose, from real relationships, from meaning. When you don't feel fulfilled in your day-to-day life, your mind looks for stimulation, something intense enough to make you forget how empty things feel. Lust is powerful because it hijacks your attention. It pulls you out of the present moment and into fantasy. And fantasy is easier than reality. Fantasy doesn't ask you to change. Reality does. That's why lust becomes a habit, not because it feels good, but because it distracts you from feeling bad. It numbs loneliness, it masks insecurity, it gives you a false sense of control when everything else in your life feels uncertain. But every time you choose that escape, you reinforce the idea that you can't handle discomfort without running from it. And that slowly chips away at you. You start feeling weaker mentally, less disciplined, less confident. You promise yourself you'll stop, then you don't. And now it's not just lust anymore, it's guilt, shame, self-disappointment. You start questioning your self-control, your character, your ability to change, all because you never addressed the root issue in the first place. The problem isn't desire. Desire is human. The problem is unchanneled desire. Desire without direction turns into self-destruction. When your energy isn't going into building something meaningful, it leaks into things that drain you instead. This is why people who overcome lust don't just resist harder, they replace it, they build structure, they strengthen their spirit, they deepen their relationships, they find something worth committing to that gives them purpose beyond momentary pleasure. Lust thrives in isolation, in boredom, in lack of direction. But when your life has meaning, when your days are intentional, when your spirit feels aligned, lust doesn't have much room to grow. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it stops controlling you. Another reason lust has so much power is because it disguises itself as confidence. It makes you feel wanted, desired, in control. For a brief moment, it tricks you into thinking you're fulfilled. But once that moment fades, you're left with the same questions, the same restlessness, the same hollow feeling you were trying to escape in the first place. That's how you know it's not real fulfillment. Real fulfillment doesn't vanish the second the stimulation stops. Real fulfillment gives you peace afterward, not regret. Clarity, not confusion. Strength, not self-disgust. And over time, if you're not careful, Lust can start shaping how you view yourself. You begin to associate your worth with how desired you feel instead of who you actually are. You start needing validation just to feel okay, and when that validation isn't there, the craving comes back stronger, not because you're weak, but because your identity is being built on something unstable. This is where self-awareness becomes everything. You have to catch yourself and ask, what am I really avoiding right now? Am I running from loneliness, from boredom, from the work I know I need to do on myself? Lust often shows up when you're avoiding growth, when you're putting off healing, when you're ignoring parts of your life that need attention. The uncomfortable truth is that growth requires sitting with discomfort, requires stillness, silence, discipline, and lust offers you an easy way out of that process. But every time you take that exit, you delay becoming the version of yourself you know you're capable of being. You don't have to be perfect. You're going to slip. You're going to struggle. That's part of being human. What matters is whether you're conscious of the pattern or blindly repeating it. Awareness alone starts breaking the cycle, because the goal isn't to eliminate desire. Desire is natural. The goal is to stop letting desire control you, to stop letting it dictate your habits, your focus, and your future. When you do that, you don't lose pleasure, you gain freedom. Here's where things start to shift if you're willing to be honest with yourself. Lust isn't just about what you want. It's about what you're avoiding becoming. Every time you give in without thinking, you're choosing comfort over growth. And that choice, repeated enough times, slowly shapes the direction of your life. You start delaying things you know you should be doing. Goals get pushed back, discipline weakens, motivation fades, not all at once, but subtly. You tell yourself you'll lock in tomorrow, you'll change next week, you'll get serious later. But later keeps moving, and you stay stuck in the same patterns, wondering why nothing feels different. And the worst part? Lust makes you numb to it. It gives you just enough relief to tolerate a life you know you're not fully proud of. It lowers the urgency to change, because why face the discomfort of growth when you can distract yourself instead? This is why so many people feel lost, not because they lack potential, but because they keep trading long-term fulfillment for short-term relief. And relief is never the same as peace. Relief fades, peace stays. When you start addressing the real voids in your life, lust starts losing its grip naturally. When you build structure into your days, when you commit to something bigger than yourself, when you start respecting your time, your body, your mind, when you develop a relationship with God, purpose or discipline, whatever grounds you, lust doesn't hit as hard, because now you have something to protect. You realize your energy is valuable, your attention is valuable, and not everything deserves access to you. You stop feeding impulses that don't align with the future you're trying to build, not out of fear, but out of respect for yourself. That's when lust stops feeling like a battle, it starts feeling like a signal. A reminder to check in with yourself, to ask, am I aligned right now? Or am I avoiding something I need to face? And every time you choose alignment over impulse, you get a little stronger, a little clearer, a little more in control. At this stage, you start realizing something important. Lust was never the root problem, it was the symptom. The real issue was disconnection. Disconnection from yourself, from purpose, from meaning, from the version of you that feels grounded and whole. Once you see that, the urge loses some of its mystery. It's no longer this uncontrollable force, it's just information. You begin to notice patterns. The urges come when you're tired, when you're bored, when you feel unaccomplished at the end of the day, when you avoided something you know you should have handled, and instead of judging yourself for it, you start listening. You ask, what am I missing right now? Rest, direction, fulfillment, human connection. This is where growth actually happens. When you suppress desire, but when you replace it. When you choose to build instead of escape. When you put energy into things that give back instead of drain you. Working on your body, your craft, your faith, your friendships. Things that leave you stronger afterward, not emptier. And the crazy part is, the more you do this, the quieter lust becomes. Not because it's gone, but because it's no longer needed to cope. You're not running from yourself anymore. You're becoming someone you respect. You start carrying yourself differently. Your confidence becomes real, not borrowed from temporary validation. You don't need constant stimulation to feel alive. You feel solid just being present, just being disciplined, just knowing you're moving in the right direction even when it's uncomfortable. That's when self-control stops feeling like restriction and starts feeling like freedom. Freedom from compulsions, freedom from regret, freedom from waking up feeling disappointed in yourself. You're no longer controlled by every urge that passes through your mind. You won't be perfect. Nobody is, but you'll be conscious. And consciousness changes everything, because once you're aware, you get to choose, and choosing growth over impulse again and again is how you reclaim your life. There's a moment where you finally understand that discipline isn't about denying yourself pleasure. It's about choosing a better one, a deeper one. The kind that doesn't disappear the second the screen goes dark or the urge passes, the kind that stays with you when you're alone with your thoughts and you can actually respect the person staring back at you. You start realizing how much time and energy you were leaking, hours, focus, mental clarity, all going towards something that never loved you back, never built you up, never moved your life forward. And once you see that clearly, it's hard to unsee it. You begin protecting your mind the same way you'd protect your body. You stop feeding it things that weaken it. This is where restraint becomes self-respect. You're no longer saying no because you're scared. You're saying no because you finally understand the cost of saying yes. You've felt the emptiness after. You've lived the fog. You've experienced how indulging too much slowly disconnects you from your ambition, your relationships, your purpose. And something else changes too. You start seeing people differently, not as objects, not as outlets, but as humans again, with depth, with emotion, with stories. Real connection stops feeling boring. It starts feeling rare, valuable, something worth protecting instead of rushing. That's when intimacy starts to return in healthier forms, real conversations, genuine friendships, moments of stillness that don't need to be filled, a sense of closeness with yourself that you didn't even realize you were missing. And once you taste that, lust loses its grip even more because now you're building something, a life you don't need to escape from, a version of yourself you're proud of. When that happens, the urge doesn't disappear, but it no longer controls you. It passes like a thought, like a wave. At the end of the day, lust only has power when you don't understand it. When you finally see it for what it is, a signal, not a solution, it stops running your life. You stop treating it like something you must obey and start treating it like something you observe, and that shift changes everything. You realize you don't need to be perfect to be disciplined. You just need to be honest. Honest about what you're missing, honest about what you're avoiding, honest about who you want to become, because every urge is an invitation, not to indulge, but to check in. Once you start responding instead of reacting, you regain control. You stop letting momentary desire dictate long-term direction. You stop trading peace for pleasure. You stop delaying your growth for comfort, and slowly, your life begins to align with the values you claim to have. Lust didn't ruin you. It revealed the places where healing was needed, the moments where connection was missing, the areas of your life that needed structure, purpose, and depth. And once you start filling those spaces intentionally, lust no longer screams for attention. It fades into the background. You become more present, more focused, more grounded. You don't feel constantly pulled in 100 directions anymore. You know what matters, you know what doesn't, and you act accordingly. This isn't about becoming cold or denying desire. It's about mastering yourself, about building a life where your mind works for you, not against you, where your choices reflect your values, where you don't need escape because you're finally moving towards something real. And when you get there, you'll look back and realize something important. The urge was never the enemy. Ignoring the message was. You keep ignoring the red flags because all you want is love, not peace, not respect, not consistency, just love. You see the signs, you see the unanswered calls, the constant busy, the way you're always an option, never a priority. And instead of asking why it hurts, you ask how to endure it. You tell yourself it's patience, that it's loyalty, that love means staying even when it costs you. But let's be honest, she doesn't check on you. She doesn't consider your feelings. She doesn't show up the way you do. And you know that. You just don't want to face what it says about you for staying. So here's the real question you've been avoiding. How much do you actually love yourself? Because when you stay in situations that keep hurting you, when you keep accepting disrespect just to feel close to someone, that's not love. That's neglect. If you truly loved yourself, you wouldn't keep choosing pain just to feel wanted. You wouldn't keep lowering your standards to keep someone around who clearly isn't choosing you back. But you don't protect yourself, you sacrifice yourself. Because being alone scares you more than being hurt. And that's why you accept the bare minimum. That's why you stay in toxic cycles. That's why you confuse attachment with love. You're not holding on because it's good for you. You're holding on because it's the only version of love you think you deserve. And that's the lie. You don't need someone else to complete you. What you actually need is to stop outsourcing your worth. Because the moment you start loving yourself, really loving yourself, you stop begging for attention. You stop tolerating disrespect. You stop calling pain connection. You You stop chasing people who only show up halfway. Self-love doesn't make you selfish. It makes you unavailable to anything that keeps breaking you. And until you learn that, you'll keep calling suffering love and calling survival loyalty. You are worth more than crumbs. You are worth more than confusion. You are worth more than being an option. But no one can convince you of that until you decide to believe it yourself. Here's the truth you keep avoiding. You don't stay because you don't see the red flags. You stay because you think leaving means nobody else will love you, so you make excuses. She's busy. She's going through stuff. She just doesn't show love the same way. But effort isn't a love language. It's a choice. And when someone keeps choosing not to show up for you, that's not confusion, that's clarity. You're not being patient. You're being hopeful in a place that's already shown you who it is. You keep giving grace to people who wouldn't give you the same. You keep explaining your pain to someone who already decided it wasn't important enough to change. And every time you stay, you send yourself a message. My feelings come second. My needs are optional. This is the best I can get. That's not love. That's self-betrayal. You think walking away means losing them, but what you're really losing right now is respect for yourself, because someone who values you doesn't make you question your worth. They don't make you beg for consistency. They don't disappear and call it space. And the reason this keeps happening isn't because you love too hard. It's because you don't love yourself hard enough to leave when you should. The moment you start choosing yourself, red flags stop looking like obstacles and start looking like exits. And exits aren't failures, they're protection. Ignoring red flags doesn't just hurt you once, it trains people how to treat you. Every time you stay after disrespect, you teach them you'll tolerate it. Every time you forgive without change, you show them your boundaries don't mean much, and they adjust accordingly. They respond less. They try less, they care just enough to keep you around, but never enough to show up fully. Because why would they? You already proved you'll stay without effort. You think you're being understanding, but what you're really doing is normalizing behavior that shouldn't have access to you. You answer late replies immediately. You accept apologies without accountability. You let patterns repeat because you're afraid of starting over, and slowly, your standards drop while their comfort rises. That's the trade you're making. You're giving someone emotional safety while you live in emotional uncertainty. And the worst part? You start blaming yourself. You tell yourself you're asking for too much, that you're sensitive, that this is just how relationships are. But healthy love doesn't require endurance. You don't have to survive it. You don't have to fight for basic respect. You don't have to convince someone to treat you well. Red flags aren't challenges to overcome. They're warnings to listen to, and the longer you ignore them, the harder it becomes to remember what being valued even feels like. The pattern doesn't break when they change, it breaks when you do. The reason you keep ignoring red flags is because you confuse attachment with love. Love feels steady, attachment feels urgent. Love doesn't make you anxious. Attachment keeps you checking your phone, replaying conversations, wondering where you stand, and you call that passion. But what you're really feeling is fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough, fear that if you don't hold on tight, you'll be forgotten. So you cling, you stay when you should leave, you wait when there's nothing coming. You accept excuses because they're easier than facing the truth. That truth being, someone who wants you won't make you feel optional. Attachment makes you chase because it needs reassurance. Love doesn't chase, it meets. And until you learn the difference, every red flag will feel like something you just need to work through. You'll keep calling distance space, disrespect miscommunication, inconsistency timing, but your body already knows that tight feeling in your chest, that constant unease, that feeling of giving more than you're getting. That's not love warning you to try harder. That's your self-respect telling you to stop. You don't need clearer signs. You don't need closure. You don't need one more conversation. You need the courage to admit that attachment is keeping you stuck in places love would never ask you to stay. Walking away feels harder than staying because staying lets you avoid the truth. As long as you're still there, you can tell yourself it might change, that maybe tomorrow they'll care more, that maybe you're just being tested. Hope keeps you stuck because leaving means admitting you invested in something that wasn't good for you. It means admitting you ignored your instincts, that you stayed longer than you should have, that you loved someone who couldn't meet you halfway, and that hurts your pride. So instead, you endure. You tell yourself pain is temporary, that love requires sacrifice, that every relationship has rough patches. But here's the part you don't want to hear. Love doesn't consistently make you feel small. It doesn't drain you. It doesn't confuse you. It doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by wanting basic respect. You stay because leaving forces accountability, not for them, but for you. It forces you to ask why you accepted less, why you ignored the signs, why you stayed quiet when your boundaries were crossed. And that's uncomfortable. But staying is costing you more than leaving ever will. Every day you remain in a situation that disrespects you, you reinforce the belief that this is all you deserve, and that belief is the real damage. Walking away isn't giving up on love, it's giving up on self-betrayal. And the moment you finally choose yourself, red flags stop feeling confusing. They feel obvious. The moment you stop ignoring red flags, everything gets quiet. No chaos, no anxiety spikes, no constant checking to see if someone still wants you. And at first, that silence feels uncomfortable because you're used to confusion, used to emotional ups and downs, used to love feeling like something you have to manage. So when you finally walk away, your brain starts questioning you. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should have stayed. Maybe this is just how love feels. But that's just withdrawal. You're not missing them. You're missing the familiarity of the pattern because ignoring red flags wasn't just about them. It was about what you were willing to tolerate to avoid being alone. Now that you've chosen yourself, you start seeing things clearly. You realize how drained you were, how often you made excuses, how little you were actually asking for compared to how much you were giving, and that clarity changes you. You don't feel pulled toward inconsistency anymore. You don't chase mixed signals. You don't feel tempted by people who only show up halfway. Because once you experience peace, chaos stops feeling exciting. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop believing love has to hurt. You stop confusing anxiety with connection. And here's the biggest shift. You stop trying to be chosen. You start choosing. Who gets access to you? Who gets your time? Who gets your emotional energy? Red flags don't feel like puzzles anymore. They feel like answers. And instead of asking me, can I make this work? You ask, does this protect me? That's when self-respect kicks in. Not loud, not dramatic, just firm. When you stop ignoring red flags, people from your past don't recognize you anymore. Not because you changed for the worse, but because you stopped being convenient. You don't explain yourself as much. You don't over-justify your boundaries. You don't stay in conversations that feel disrespectful or draining, and that confuses people. They're used to the version of you that stayed quiet, that gave chances, that tried to understand at the expense of being understood. So when you walk away faster now, they call you cold. They say you've changed. They say you're doing too much. But what they really mean is, you're no longer available for the dynamic they benefited from. People who thrived on your tolerance don't like your standards. People who were comfortable with your silence don't like your clarity. And that's okay, because growth isn't about being liked, it's about being protected. You're not harsh, you're not bitter, you're not closed off. You're just done negotiating your self-respect. You no longer wait for disrespect to become unbearable before leaving. You don't need proof anymore. The first pattern is enough. And here's the part that matters most. The right people won't question this version of you. They won't push your boundaries. They won't test your tolerance. They won't need you to over-explain. They'll feel your standards and meet them naturally. Anyone who leaves because you stopped accepting red flags was never meant to stay anyway. That's not loss, that's alignment. Self-respect feels lonely at first, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you stopped tolerating what everyone else normalized. You don't have constant access to people anymore. You don't have drama to distract you. You don't have half connections keeping you entertained. And that quiet can feel heavy, because for a long time, chaos made you feel needed, and consistency made you feel chosen. Fixing things made you feel valuable. Now none of that is there, and your brain tries to convince you that you're missing out, that maybe you were happier when you stayed, that maybe standards are overrated, that maybe being lonely is worse than being disrespected. But that's just the adjustment period. You're unlearning a pattern where love had to hurt to feel real. Self-respect strips away the noise and leaves you with truth. You start seeing how many connections were built on convenience instead of care. How many people stayed because you made it easy for them, not because they valued you. And yes, that realization stings, but it also gives you something you didn't have before. Peace, no guessing, no waiting, no emotional whiplash, just clarity. And from that clarity, your standards get quieter but stronger. You don't announce them, you don't defend them, you just live by them. And anyone who can't meet you there falls away naturally. Loneliness isn't punishment here. It's space to rebuild your sense of worth without someone else validating it, space to remember who you are when you're not chasing or fixing or proving, and soon that loneliness turns into confidence, not loud confidence, stable confidence, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind that doesn't beg, the kind that knows red flags aren't obstacles, they're directions. At some point you realize something uncomfortable. You don't actually miss them. You miss the version of yourself that kept trying to be enough. You miss the effort you gave, the hope you held on to, the belief that if you just loved harder, things would finally change because chasing gave you purpose. It made your pain feel meaningful. It made waiting feel justified. It made disappointment feel like part of the process. Now that you've stopped, there's nothing left to fix. And that's when the grief shows up. You grieve the time you spent trying to earn what should have been given freely. You grieve the energy you poured into people who never poured back. You grieve the patience you mistook for love, not because you were foolish, but because you cared. And it hurts to admit that caring didn't save anything. You start seeing clearly how often you ignored your own voice, how many times your body told you to leave while your heart begged you to stay. You stayed loyal to people who weren't loyal to your peace, and that realization is heavy, because now you can't go back, you can't unsee the patterns, you can't pretend disrespect was accidental, you can't convince yourself that red flags were just misunderstandings. You've outgrown the version of you that survived on hope alone. And while that growth is necessary, it still feels like loss. But here's the truth. You didn't lose something real. You let go of something that only existed because you kept tolerating it. And the more distance you get, the clearer it becomes. What you were missing wasn't love, it was self-respect. Ignoring red flags was never about love. It was about not wanting to choose yourself. Because choosing yourself meant walking away without guarantees, without reassurance, without someone else filling the silence, so you stayed. You told yourself love takes patience, that people need time, that your pain was just part of the process, but deep down, you knew the truth. You weren't staying because it felt right. You were staying because leaving felt terrifying, terrifying to be alone, terrifying to admit you deserved better, terrifying to sit with the idea that you chose someone who couldn't choose you back, though you ignored the signs. Not because you didn't see them, but because seeing them meant action. And action meant accountability. But here's what finally clicks. Red flags don't hurt you. Ignoring them does. Every time you stayed, you taught yourself that your needs were optional. Every time you excused behavior, you taught yourself that love should be endured. Every time you waited for change, you delayed your own growth. And that cycle doesn't end when someone finally treats you right. It ends when you stop accepting what treats you wrong. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop wanting love. It means you stop betraying yourself just to keep it. It means you walk away sooner. You trust discomfort. You listen the first time something feels off. Not because you're cold, but because you're done confusing pain with connection. And once you reach this point, red flags don't feel complicated anymore. They feel clear. You don't argue with them. You don't negotiate with them. You don't try to turn them green. You leave because now you understand something you didn't before. Being alone is temporary. Self-betrayal is cumulative. And you're no longer willing to pay that price. That's not bitterness. That's self-respect. And that's where the cycle finally ends. Maybe I'm not hard to love. Maybe I'm just not someone people stay for, because they come close, they get attached, they say they care, they act invested, and then something shifts, they pull back, they get unsure, they choose easier. And after it happens enough times, you stop blaming timing, you start blaming yourself. You start wondering if you're good for the moment, but not for the long term. If you're exciting, but not secure. If you're lovable, but not keepable. And that thought sits heavy because being left doesn't just hurt your heart, it makes you question your value. When almost relationships keep happening, your brain starts building a story, a quiet one. It says, people like you, but they don't stay. And once that narrative forms, everything starts filtering through it. If someone takes longer to reply, you assume they're losing interest. If someone pulls back slightly, you assume it's the beginning of the end. Because you've seen this pattern before, you've felt the slow fade, the shift in tone, the subtle detachment. So now even when something feels good, you brace yourself, not because you're negative, because you're tired of being surprised. And the scary part, you start expecting abandonment before it even happens. You hold back, you don't get too excited, you don't fully relax, because deep down, you're preparing for them to leave, not because you're unlovable, but because repetition turned into belief. Fully relax into the connection, because fully relax into the connection. Because what's the point if it's temporary anyway? You become hyper-aware, watching for changes, tracking energy shifts, reading into silence, and sometimes, without realizing it, you create distance first. You pull back slightly, you act less invested, you test their consistency, not to play games, but to protect yourself, because if they're gonna leave, you'd rather see it coming. But here's the hard truth. When you show up guarded, you don't give love the chance to feel safe. Not because you're toxic, not because you're difficult, but because you're tired of being surprised, tired of being left, tired of being the one who cares more. So you half show up, and then when it ends, it feels like confirmation. See? They left again. But maybe it's not that you're someone people don't stay for. Maybe it's that you're still healing from the last time they didn't. There's a difference between being left and choosing people who were never built to stay. That's the part we don't always see, because when someone walks away, it feels personal. It feels like they evaluated you and decided you weren't enough. But look closer. Were they consistent from the start? Were they clear about their intentions? Were they emotionally available or just present? Sometimes the pattern isn't that you're not worth staying for. It's that you keep giving your depth to people who only plan to visit. People who like connection but fear commitment. People who enjoy intimacy but avoid responsibility. And when they leave, it reinforces the narrative. No one stays. But maybe the better question is, who have I been choosing? Because when you stop choosing emotionally unavailable people, the pattern changes. Not instantly, not magically, but gradually. You realize you were never hard to stay for, you were just staying with people who were temporary. At some point, you stop chasing permanence, you stop trying to lock something in before it's solid, stop over-investing just to make it last, stop forcing potential into commitment because you realize something. You can't convince someone to stay. You can't love someone into being ready. You can't perform your way into permanence. So instead of gripping tighter, you loosen your hold. You let people show you who they are. You stop rushing labels. Stop fantasizing futures before foundations exist. And something interesting happens when you're no longer desperate for someone to stay. You start attracting people who actually want to. Because permanence isn't built through pressure, it's built through alignment. You don't chase it, you allow it. And when someone stays without being forced, without being convinced, without being chased, it feels different. Not fragile, not uncertain, just steady. At some point, the fear shifts. It stops being, they're going to leave, and becomes, if they do, I'll be okay. That's confidence, not the loud kind, not the I don't care kind. The steady kind. You stop gripping so tightly. You stop overanalyzing every shift. You stop trying to secure permanence too early because you know this. If someone stays, it's because they want to, not because you convinced them, not because you performed perfectly, not because you minimized yourself. And if they leave, it doesn't collapse your identity. It doesn't confirm you're unworthy. It just confirms they weren't aligned. You're not scared of people leaving anymore. You're more concerned with whether they're capable of staying. And that's different because now you're not auditioning, you're observing. And the people who are meant to stay, they won't need to be chased. They won't need to be monitored. They won't need to be reminded. They'll just stay. Being someone people stay for starts with staying true to yourself first, because when you abandon yourself to keep someone else, you teach them that you'll tolerate instability, you over-adjust, over-forgive, overextend, you bend your boundaries so they don't feel pressured, you silence your needs so they don't feel overwhelmed, and slowly, you're the one disappearing. But here's the shift. The more you stay grounded in who you are, the less you attract people who only plan to pass through. When you communicate clearly, when you hold your standards calmly, when you don't chase mixed signals, the wrong people leave faster. And that's not loss, that's filtering. You don't become someone people stay for by shrinking yourself into convenience. You become that by being steady in your worth. The right person won't stay because you made it easy. They'll stay because they respect what you stand on. The right love doesn't feel like survival. It doesn't feel like holding your breath. It doesn't feel like waiting for the other shoe to drop. It doesn't feel like constantly proving you're worth keeping. It feels stable, not boring, not forced, stable. You're not overthinking every text. You're not tracking effort. You're not wondering if today is the day they change their mind. You just feel secure, and that's what you've been craving this whole time. Not obsession, not intensity, not dramatic passion, stability. Because when someone is truly staying, you don't have to fight for reassurance. You don't have to shrink. You don't have to overperform. You don't have to prepare for abandonment. You get to relax. And if you've never experienced that, of course, you start thinking maybe you're not someone people stay for, but maybe you've just never been with someone capable of stable love. There's a difference. At some point, you stop fearing being left. You start expecting to be valued. That's the real shift. You don't walk into connections thinking, how long will this last? You walk in thinking, if this is aligned, it will stay. You stop preparing for abandonment. Stop bracing for the slow fade. Stop assuming you'll have to fight to be kept, because now you know something. If someone leaves, it doesn't mean you weren't worth staying for. It means they weren't built to stay. And instead of internalizing it, you let it pass. You don't collapse. You don't spiral. You don't rewrite your worth. You understand that being valued is the bare minimum. And once you truly believe that, you stop entertaining anything less. You don't chase clarity. You don't beg for reassurance. You don't accept confusion. You expect effort. You expect consistency. You expect intention. And the people who can't offer that, they filter themselves out. So, am I just not someone people stay for? No, I just stopped staying where I'm not valued. There's a difference. For a long time, I thought people leaving was proof that I wasn't enough, not interesting enough, not secure enough, not worth committing to long term. But now I see it clearly. The wrong people didn't stay because they were never meant to build. They were meant to teach me me what inconsistency feels like, teach me what mixed signals look like, teach me what I will never accept again. And once you learn that, you stop chasing permanence, you stop trying to be easier, you stop overproving, you stop bending yourself into something digestible, because you realize this. You are absolutely someone people stay for, just not people who are unsure, not people who love halfway, not people who need options. The right person won't need convincing. They won't need time to decide your worth. They won't feel overwhelmed by your depth. They'll feel steady. And this time, if someone leaves, you won't question your value, you'll question their capacity, because you're no longer asking, well, why don't people stay? You're asking, are they capable of staying at my level? And that's the shift. There wasn't a big moment, no argument, no dramatic ending, no clear, this is over. That's what made it worse, because the moment I realized she stopped loving me was quiet. It was in the way she talked to me, the way her voice didn't carry the same feeling anymore, the way everything sounded the same but felt different, and that's when it hit me. Nothing happened, but everything changed. At first I tried to ignore it, because when something shifts like that, your first instinct isn't to accept it, it's to explain it. Maybe she's just tired, maybe she's stressed, maybe she just needs time. So I kept talking to her like nothing changed. Like if I stayed the same, things would go back to how they were, but they didn't. The conversations were still there, but the feeling wasn't. She still replied, still answered, still kept things going just enough, but something was missing. That energy, that warmth, that feeling like she actually wanted to be there, and you can feel that difference even if you don't want to admit it. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Shorter replies, less emotion, less effort to keep things alive, like I was someone she talked to, not someone she was connected to. And that's when it started sinking in, because love doesn't disappear all at once. It fades slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you're the only one still holding on to what it used to be. And that realization hits in the smallest moments. A dry reply, a delayed answer, a conversation that used to flow that now feeling forced. I kept thinking it would come back, that maybe it was just a phase, that maybe I just needed to be more patient, so I stayed. I kept showing up the same way, hoping she'd meet me there again, but she didn't, and that's when it finally clicked. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet realization. I'm still here, but she's not really. Not in the way she used to be. That's the hardest kind of ending. Because nothing officially ended, there's no clear moment to point at. Just a slow shift until you're standing in something that looks the same, but doesn't feel the same at all. And once you feel that, you can't unfeel it. You can try to ignore it, try to convince yourself it's temporary, but deep down, you know, something changed, and it's not coming back. The moment I realized she stopped loving me was the moment I stopped feeling loved by her. No words, no explanation, just a feeling that wasn't there anymore. And now I understand something clearly. Love doesn't just live in words, it lives in effort, in presence, in consistency. And when those disappear, the feeling follows. That was the moment, not loud, not obvious, just real. The worst kind of pain isn't being misunderstood. It's being seen and still getting left behind, because opening up isn't casual. You don't hand your real self to just anyone. You let them in on the stuff you normally keep locked up, the thoughts you argue with at 2 a.m., the fears you laugh off so nobody worries, the way you care so hard it almost feels embarrassing. And for a minute, it feels like you finally found someone safe. They read your silence correctly. They hear what you don't say. They look at you like they're not guessing, like they actually know. And that's the part that makes you soften. Then one day, they're gone. No fight. No goodbye that matches how close it felt. No ending that makes sense. Just nothing. And that nothing is loud. It sits where the connection used to be. It makes you replay everything like a crime scene. What did I do? Was I too much? Did I share too early? Should I have stayed guarded? But listen, if someone leaves after you showed them the real you, that doesn't mean you were wrong for being real. It doesn't mean your depth is a problem. It just means they weren't prepared for what they asked to see. Being open isn't the mistake. The mistake is thinking you should shrink so people won't run, because the right people don't disappear when they understand you. They get closer. After they leave, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, because now you're not just missing them, you're missing the version of yourself you were when you felt understood. You replay everything, not because you're obsessed, but because your brain is trying to make sense of something that never got an ending. You think about the way they listened, the way they noticed things nobody else did, the way you didn't have to explain yourself all the time, and now they're gone. So your mind starts filling in the gaps. You assume it must have been something you said, something you revealed too early, something you should have kept to yourself. That's how loss works when there's no closure. Your brain turns inward and starts pointing fingers. You don't just lose the person, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start telling yourself, yeah, next time don't say so much. Next time don't get attached. Next time stay surface level. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin shrinking, not because you want to, but because you're trying to protect yourself from feeling that again. But here's the part nobody tells you. What hurt wasn't opening up. What hurt was being met halfway and then abandoned. That doesn't mean vulnerability is dangerous. It means inconsistency is. And there's a difference. After something like that, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It just changes shape. You don't stop believing in people. You stop believing in consistency. You start noticing patterns everywhere, a slower reply, a shorter message, a shift in tone that probably means nothing, but your body reacts like it's everything. Because once you've been left after being seen, your nervous system remembers it before your mind does, so you stay alert, not dramatic, just cautious. You don't lean in the same way anymore, you hold back details, you soften your honesty, you keep parts of yourself for later, just in case later never comes. And the messed up part is, people don't always notice you doing this. They just feel a distance they can't explain. You still care. You're still present, but there's a layer of protection now, like glass between you and them, and you hate that because you remember how it felt before, how natural it was to let someone know you, how easy it felt to just exist without guarding every word. Now every connection feels like a risk assessment. Is this safe? Will they stay? Am I getting too close again? You don't ask these questions out loud, you just feel them, and slowly you start mistaking caution for growth. You tell yourself you're being mature, when really you're just afraid of reliving the same ending. But here's the truth. Trust didn't break because you opened up. It broke because someone showed you intimacy without responsibility, and that's not your fault. After being left like that, most people learn the wrong lesson. They think the problem was caring too much. They think the solution is to care less, so they start editing themselves. They become easier, quieter, less honest, less intense. They tell themselves, next time don't go so deep, next time don't show everything, next time stay in control. But all that really does is teach you how to survive connection, not how to experience it. You don't stop wanting closeness. You just start rationing it. You give people pieces instead of presence, versions instead of truth, highlights instead of depth, and then you wonder why connections feel empty now, why conversations don't hit the same, why nobody really knows you anymore, why being around people still feels lonely. It's because you didn't heal. You adapted. You learned how to avoid pain, not how to build something real again. And here's the hard truth. If someone can only stay when you're small, they were never meant to know you fully. Shrinking yourself doesn't protect you. It just delays the same outcome. Because the people who leave when you're honest would have left eventually anyway. All hiding does is make you lose yourself before they're even gone. At some point, you have to unlearn the lie that your depth is what pushed them away. Because if depth were the problem, it would hurt everyone the same. But it doesn't. Some people lean into it, others panic. And and the difference has nothing to do with you. Depth only feels overwhelming to people who haven't met themselves yet. To someone who avoids their own emotions, your honesty feels like pressure, your awareness feels like exposure, your care feels like responsibility. So they leave, not because you were too much, but because staying would have required them to show up in ways they weren't ready for. And that's important to understand. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for forever. You were just asking for presence, consistency, communication, effort that matched the closeness they accepted. That's not intensity, that's basic emotional accountability. But when someone isn't capable of that, they label it as too deep because it's easier than admitting they don't know how to stay. So no, your depth wasn't the problem. The problem was inviting someone into a space they didn't know how to hold. And that doesn't mean you should become lighter. It means you should become more selective. After something like this, a lot of people start punishing themselves without realizing it. They replay the moment over and over, looking for where they went wrong. They tell themselves, I should have seen it coming, I should have known better, I should have protected myself. But that's not growth, that's blame dressed up as reflection. You didn't fail by trusting, you didn't mess up by being open, you didn't lose because you cared, you just encountered someone who could only meet you halfway. And instead of letting that truth land, you turned it inward. You started questioning your instincts, your emotions, your ability to choose people. That's how one loss turns into self-doubt. You don't just grieve the person, you grieve your confidence in yourself, and slowly you start believing that maybe you're bad at choosing, that maybe your judgment can't be trusted. But here's what matters. You didn't misjudge their potential. You misjudge their capacity. Those are not the same thing. Someone can see you, feel close to you, even care about you, and still not be capable of staying. That doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you gave someone access before you saw their limits clearly. That's not something to punish yourself for. That's something to learn from without hardening, because the goal isn't to trust less, it's to trust wiser. Opening up again after something like that feels risky, not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to disappear inside it. You move slower this time, not closed, just intentional. You stop rushing closeness. You let consistency show itself before attachment does. You watch how someone handles honesty, not just how they respond to it, because being open doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means choosing who earns access. You learn that real safety isn't instant chemistry. It's follow-through. It's effort that doesn't fade when things get quiet. It's someone staying curious instead of pulling away. And you stop over-explaining yourself. You don't justify your needs. You don't apologize for caring. You don't chase clarity from people who disappear. Instead of communicate, that's not walls, that's boundaries. You realize you don't need to prove your depth anymore. The right people recognize it without being overwhelmed. And for the first time, opening up doesn't feel like self-abandonment. It feels like alignment. You're still honest, still real, still deep, just no longer handing your heart to people who haven't shown they can hold it. At the end of all this, you start to understand something important. The people who stay don't make you feel confused. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you guess where you stand. They don't make you question whether being yourself was a mistake. They stay because they see you, not in spite of it. They don't flinch at your depth. They don't rush you to be easier. They don't treat your honesty like a burden. They meet you with steadiness, not perfection. Not constant intensity, just consistency, and that's how you know. Because real connection doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't make you anxious after silence. It doesn't leave you replaying everything you said. It feels calm, grounded, safe in a way that doesn't need explaining. You stop wondering if you're too much. You stop preparing yourself for disappearance. You stop shrinking to be kept. And you realize something quietly powerful. The people who left weren't proof that you were hard to love. They were proof that you were inviting people into a depth they hadn't earned yet. And that's not something to regret, because being seen was never a mistake. Being honest was never a flaw. Caring deeply was never the wrong move. The right people won't vanish once they understand you. They'll stay because of it. The worst kind of pain isn't being misunderstood. It's being seen and still getting left behind, because opening up isn't casual. You don't hand your real self to just anyone. You let them in on the stuff you normally keep locked up, the thoughts you argue with at 2 a.m., the fears you laugh off so nobody worries, the way you care so hard it almost feels embarrassing, and for a minute it feels like you finally found someone safe. They read your silence correctly. They hear what you don't say. They look at you like they're not guessing, like they actually know. And that's the part that makes you soften. Then one day, they're gone. No fight, no goodbye that matches how close it felt. No ending that makes sense, just nothing. And that nothing is loud. It sits where the connection used to be. It makes you replay everything like a crime scene. What did I do? Was I too much? Did I share too early? Should I have stayed guarded? But listen, if someone leaves after you showed them the real you, that doesn't mean you were wrong for being real. It doesn't mean your depth is a problem. It just means they weren't prepared for what they asked to see. Being open isn't the mistake. The mistake is thinking you should shrink so people won't run, because the right people don't disappear when they understand you. They get closer. After they leave, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, because now you're not just missing them, you're missing the version of yourself you were when you felt understood. You replay everything, not because you're obsessed, but because your brain is trying to make sense of something that never got an ending. You think about the way they listened, the way they noticed things nobody else did, the way you didn't have to explain yourself all the time, and now they're gone. So your mind starts filling in the gaps. You assume it must have been something you said, something you revealed too early, something you should have kept to yourself. That's how loss works when there's no closure. Your brain turns inward and starts pointing fingers. You don't just lose the person, you lose trust in your own judgment. You start telling yourself, next time, don't say so much. Next time, don't get attached. Next time, stay surface level. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin shrinking. Not because you want to, but because you're trying to protect yourself from feeling that again. But here's the part nobody tells you. What hurt wasn't opening up. What hurt was being met halfway and then abandoned. That doesn't mean vulnerability is dangerous. It means inconsistency is. And there's a difference. After something like that, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It just changes shape. You don't stop believing in people. You stop believing in consistency. You start noticing patterns everywhere. A slower reply, a shorter message, a shift in tone that probably means nothing, but your body reacts like it's everything, because once you've been left after being seen, your nervous system remembers it before your mind does. So you stay alert, not dramatic, just cautious. You don't lean in the same way anymore. You hold back details. You soften your honesty. You keep parts of yourself for later, just in case later never comes. And the messed up part is, people don't always notice you doing this. They just feel a distance they can't explain. You still care. You're still present, but there's a layer of protection now, like glass between you and them. And you hate that because you remember how it felt before, how natural it was to let someone know you, how easy it felt to just exist without guarding every word. Now every connection feels like a risk assessment. Is this safe? Will they stay? Am I getting too close again? You don't ask these questions out loud. You just feel them. And slowly you start mistaking caution for growth. You tell yourself you're being mature, when really you're just afraid of reliving the same ending. But here's the truth. Trust didn't break because you opened up. It broke because someone showed you intimacy without responsibility, and that's not your fault. After being left like that, most people learn the wrong lesson. They think the problem was caring too much. They think the solution is to care less, so they start editing themselves. They become easier, quieter, less honest, less intense. They tell themselves, next time don't go so deep, next time don't show everything, next time stay in control. But all that really does is teach you how to survive connection, not how to experience it. You don't stop wanting closeness, you just start rationing it. You give people pieces instead of presence, versions instead of truth, highlights instead of depth. And then you wonder why connections feel empty now, why conversations don't hit the same, why nobody really knows you anymore, why being around people still feels lonely. It's because you didn't heal, you adapt. You learned how to avoid pain, not how to build something real again. And And here's the hard truth. If someone can only stay when you're small, they were never meant to know you. Shrinking yourself doesn't protect you, it just delays the same outcome. Because the people who leave when you're honest would have left eventually anyway. All hiding does is make you lose yourself before they're even gone. At some point, you have to unlearn the lie that your depth is what pushed them away. Because if depth were the problem, it would hurt everyone the same, but it doesn't. Some people lean into it, others panic, and the difference has nothing to do with you. Depth only feels overwhelming to people who haven't met themselves yet, to someone who avoids their own emotions. Your honesty feels like pressure. Your awareness feels like exposure. Your care feels like responsibility. So they leave, not because you were too much, but because staying would have required them to show up in ways they weren't ready for. And that's important to understand. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for forever. You were just asking for presence, consistency, communication, effort that matched the closeness they accepted. That's not intensity. That's basic emotional accountability. But when someone isn't capable of that, they label it as too deep because it's easier than admitting they don't know how to stay. So no, your depth wasn't the problem. The problem was inviting someone into a space they didn't know how to hold. And that doesn't mean you should become lighter. It means you should become more selective. After something like this, a lot of people start punishing themselves without realizing it. They replay the moment over and over, looking for where they went wrong. They tell themselves, I should have seen it coming. I should have known better. I should have protected myself. But that's not growth. That's blame dressed up as reflection. You didn't fail by trusting. You didn't mess up by being open. You didn't lose because you cared. You just encountered someone who could only meet you halfway. And instead of letting that truth land, you turned it inward. You started questioning your instincts, your emotions, your ability to choose people. That's how one loss turns into self-doubt. You don't just grieve the person, you grieve your confidence in yourself. And slowly you start believing that maybe you're bad at choosing, that maybe your judgment can't be trusted. But here's what matters. You didn't misjudge their potential. You misjudged their capacity. Those are not the same thing. Someone can see you, feel close to you, even care about you, and still not be capable of staying. That doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means you gave someone access before you saw their limits clearly. That's not something to punish yourself for. That's something to learn from without hardening, because the goal isn't to trust less. It's to trust wiser. Opening up again after something like that feels risky. Not because you don't want connection, but because you don't want to disappear inside it, so you move slower this time, not closed, just intentional. You stop rushing closeness. You let consistency show itself before attachment does. You watch how someone handles honesty, not just how they respond to it, because being open doesn't mean being available to everyone. It means choosing who earns access. You learn that real safety isn't instant chemistry. It's follow through. It's effort that doesn't fade when things get quiet. It's someone staying curious instead of pulling away. And you stop over-explaining yourself. You don't justify your needs. You don't apologize for caring. You don't chase clarity from people who disappear. Instead of communicate. That's not walls, that's boundaries. You realize you don't need to prove your depth anymore. The right people recognize it without being overwhelmed, and for the first time, opening up doesn't feel like self-abandonment. It feels like alignment. You're still honest, still real, still deep, just no longer handing your heart to people who haven't shown they can hold it. At the end of all this, you start to understand something important. The people who stay don't make you feel confused. They don't disappear when things get real. They don't make you guess where you stand. They don't make you question whether being yourself was a mistake. They stay because they see you, not in spite of it. They don't flinch at your depth. They don't rush you to be easier. They don't treat your honesty like a burden. They meet you with steadiness, not perfection, not constant intensity, just consistency, and that's how you know. because real connection doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't make you anxious after silence. It doesn't leave you replaying everything you said. It feels calm, grounded, safe in a way that doesn't need explaining. You stop wondering if you're too much. You stop preparing yourself for disappearance. You stop shrinking to be kept, and you realize something quietly powerful. The people who left weren't proof that you were hard to love. They were proof that you were inviting people into a depth they hadn't earned yet. And that's not something to regret, because being seen was never a mistake. Being honest was never a flaw. Caring deeply was never the wrong move. The right people won't vanish once they understand you. They'll stay because of it. For the longest time I thought she loved me, not just liked me, not just enjoyed being around me. I thought she actually loved me because she talked to me every day. She wanted to know what I was doing. She asked about my life like it mattered to her. And when someone shows you that kind of attention, it's easy to believe the feelings behind it are real. So I believed it. I believed the late night conversations meant something deeper. I believed the way she smiled when we talked meant she cared. I believed all the time we spent together was building something real. But looking back now, I think she didn't love me. I think she loved the attention. There's a difference. When someone loves you, they care about who you are, your thoughts, your struggles, your future. They care about the person standing in front of them. But when someone loves the attention, the focus isn't really on you, it's on how you make them feel. The compliments, the validation, the feeling of being wanted. And for a while I was giving her all of that. I was the person who always answered, the person who always listened, the person who always showed up when she needed someone to talk to. And I thought that meant I mattered to her, but eventually I started noticing something strange. Whenever I pulled back, she suddenly came closer. Whenever I stopped giving her attention, she started reaching out again. Not because she missed me, but because she missed the way I made her feel. And that's when something started becoming clear. Maybe she didn't love me the way I thought she did. Maybe she just loved having someone who cared about her that much. Once that thought entered my head, that maybe she didn't love me, maybe she just loved the attention, I started seeing things differently. Moments that once felt meaningful started feeling different. I remembered how often she reached out when she was bored, when she had nothing going on, when she needed someone to talk to. And every time I was there, answering her messages, listening to her problems, giving her reassurance whenever she doubted herself. At the time, I thought that's what love looked like. Two people being there for each other. But when I really looked at it honestly, something felt uneven. Because when she needed attention, I was always available. But when I needed support, it didn't always feel the same. Sometimes she would disappear. Sometimes the conversation would suddenly end. Sometimes it felt like the connection only existed when she was the one who needed it. And that's when a difficult question started forming in my mind. Was she actually interested in me? Or was she interested in the way I made her feel about herself? Because attention can be addictive. When someone constantly reminds you that you're special, that you're wanted, that someone cares deeply about you, it feels good. Really good. And some people don't fall in love with the person giving them that feeling. They fall in love with the feeling itself, the validation, the reassurance, the comfort of knowing someone is always there. And I think that's what I was to her. Not a partner, not someone she truly wanted to build something with, but someone who gave her a constant source of emotional attention. And the moment I started seeing that pattern, everything began to make more sense. The more I thought about it, the more patterns started standing out. Because when someone actually loves you, their presence in your life is consistent. They don't only show up when they need something. They don't only reach out when they're bored. They don't only care when the attention is focused on them. But with her, the connection always seemed to revolve around how she felt. If she had a bad day, I was the first person she called. If she felt insecure, I was the one reminding her how amazing she was. If she needed someone to listen, I was always there. And at the time I thought that meant I was important to her, but eventually I noticed something uncomfortable. When I had a bad day, she wasn't always there the same way. When I needed reassurance, the conversation would shift quickly. When I tried to open up about my own struggles, it didn't always hold her attention for long, and that's when it started feeling like the relationship wasn't built around us. It was built around her receiving and me giving, and the scary part about that kind of dynamic is you don't notice it right away. Because when you care about someone, giving feels natural. You don't keep score. You don't measure every moment of effort. You just show up because you believe the connection matters, but slowly you start realizing something. You're the one holding most of the emotional weight. You're the one keeping the conversations alive. You're the one making sure the connection doesn't fade. And when you stop doing that, everything changes. That's when the real truth shows itself. Because the moment I stopped giving her constant attention, something strange happened. She didn't start fighting harder for the connection. She didn't try to understand what changed. Instead, the distance grew. And that's when I realized something that hurt more than the breakup itself. She didn't miss me. She missed the attention I gave her. Realizing that she didn't miss me, she missed the attention, was one of the hardest truths to accept. Because when you care about someone deeply, you don't want to believe that your place in their life was built around something that shallow. You want to believe the connection meant something real, that the conversations mattered, that the time you spent talking late at night actually meant you were building something. But once I started paying attention to the pattern, it became impossible to ignore. Whenever I gave her attention, everything felt great. She was warm, engaged, interested. She would laugh more, reply faster, make it seem like we had this deep connection. But the moment that attention slowed down, everything changed. Suddenly the conversations felt shorter, the interest faded, the energy shifted, and that's when it finally clicked. Her feelings weren't connected to me. They were connected to the attention I was giving her. Because when someone loves you, their connection doesn't disappear just because the attention changes. But when someone loves the attention, the moment that validation slows down, so does their interest. And looking back now, that explains everything. Why she would suddenly become distant, why she would come back the moment I stopped reaching out, why the connection always felt strongest when I was the one giving the most. It wasn't love, it was validation, and I was the person supplying it. Once I finally understood that she loved the attention more than she loved me, a lot of things started making sense. For the longest time, I kept wondering why the connection always felt unstable, why some days she seemed completely invested, and other days she felt distant, why the energy between us depended so heavily on how much I was giving. At the time, I thought that was normal. I thought relationships just had ups and downs. But there's a difference between normal ups and downs and a connection that only exists when one person is constantly feeding it. And that's what this was. Whenever I was fully present, texting first, asking about her day, complimenting her, showing that I cared, everything felt good between us. But when I pulled back even slightly, the dynamic changed immediately. The warmth disappeared, the conversation slowed down, and the connection that once felt so strong suddenly felt fragile. That's when it became impossible to ignore what was really happening. Because love doesn't disappear just because attention shifts for a moment, but validation does. Validation needs constant reinforcement. It needs someone to keep providing that feeling of being admired and wanted. And once that source slows down, the person who depended on it starts looking for it somewhere else. That's when I realized something that hurt more than I expected. I wasn't the person she loved. I was the person who made her feel important. And once you realize that difference, you start understanding the relationship in a completely different way. Once that realization settled in, that she loved the attention more than she loved me, Something inside me started shifting. At first it hurt more, because it meant all the things I thought were meaningful might not have meant the same thing to her. All those long conversations, all the moments where she told me things she said she didn't tell anyone else, all the times she said she appreciated having me in her life. I thought those things meant we were building something real, but now I started seeing them through a different lens. Maybe she didn't say those things because she loved me. Maybe she said them because she loved the feeling of having someone who cared about her that much. And that's a dangerous dynamic, because when someone becomes your main source of validation, it feels powerful. You feel admired, you feel important, you feel like someone is always there to remind you that you matter. But that feeling isn't the same as love. Love cares about the person giving the attention. Validation only cares about the feeling it creates. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something uncomfortable. Whenever I tried to shift the focus of the relationship, whenever I wanted something deeper, the energy changed. If I asked serious questions about where things were going, if I talked about building something more stable, if I needed emotional support myself, that's when the connection suddenly felt weaker. Almost like the relationship only worked when I was the one giving, not when I needed something back. And that's when the truth became impossible to ignore. The relationship wasn't built on mutual connection. It was built on attention, and I was the one providing it. After I understood that the relationship was built more on attention than love, another uncomfortable truth started showing itself. I wasn't just giving attention, I was maintaining the entire connection. I was the one making sure the conversation didn't die. I was the one checking in first. I was the one asking how she was doing, making sure she felt heard, making sure she felt valued. And at the time, I didn't see that as a problem. When you care about someone, putting in effort feels natural. You don't think about it like a transaction. You think about it like loyalty. But over time, I started noticing something. The relationship only felt alive when I was feeding it. Whenever I stepped back, even a little, everything started fading. The messages slowed down, the energy dropped. The connection that once felt strong suddenly felt fragile, and that's when it hit me. Love doesn't disappear the moment someone stops giving constant attention, but validation does. Validation needs fuel. It needs someone constantly reminding you that you're wanted, that you're interesting, that someone is thinking about you. And the moment that fuel slows down, the person who depended on it starts feeling empty. That's when they either come back asking for more, or they go find someone else who will give it to them. And I think that's what I was to her. Not a partner, not someone she truly wanted to build something with. I was a source of attention, a source of validation, a source of emotional reassurance. And once you realize you were someone's source, not their choice, the whole relationship starts looking different. Once I accepted that I was just a source of attention for her, something else started becoming clear. The connection only existed when it benefited her emotionally. Whenever she needed reassurance, I was important. Whenever she felt lonely, I mattered. Whenever she needed someone to remind her that she was attractive, interesting, or worth talking to, suddenly I was the person she wanted to talk to again. But the moment she felt good again, the moment that emotional gap inside her was filled, something would change. The urgency would disappear. The replies would slow down, the energy would fade, and I would sit there wondering what I did wrong. For a long time, I blamed myself for those shifts. I thought maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I didn't keep the excitement alive. But once you understand the difference between love and attention, everything makes more sense. Love stays even when the excitement fades. Love stays even when you're not constantly entertaining someone. Love stays even when the validation slows down for a moment. But attention doesn't work like that. Attention is temporary. It's something people chase when they need to feel good about themselves. And once they get that feeling again, they don't always need the person who gave it to them anymore. Looking back, that explains why the connection always felt inconsistent. It explains why some days she felt deeply invested in us all, and other days it felt like she barely noticed I existed, because I wasn't the person she loved. I was the person she turned to whenever she needed to feel important. And once I saw that clearly, the whole relationship started making sense in a way it never had before. For a while, realizing that hurt more than anything else, because nobody wants to believe they were just someone's source of attention. You want to believe the connection meant something deeper. You want to believe the time you invested mattered in the same way for both of you. But eventually something changed in the way I saw it. I stopped feeling embarrassed about how much I cared, because caring deeply isn't the problem. The problem is giving that level of attention to someone who only values the feeling it gives them. And that's a big difference. There's nothing wrong with being loyal. There's nothing wrong with showing up for someone you care about. The mistake is believing that everyone who accepts your attention values it the same way you do. Some people appreciate attention, other people depend on it. And the people who depend on it will keep you close as long as you keep feeding that feeling inside them. But the moment the attention stops, the connection disappears, not because they suddenly stop liking you, but because the feeling they were chasing isn't coming from you anymore. And once you understand that, something inside you changes. You stop chasing people who only show up when they need something. You stop investing in connections that only exist when you're the one giving, because you realize something important. You deserve someone who values you, not just the attention you give them. Looking back now, I don't think she loved me, but I also don't think she was pretending the whole time. I think she genuinely liked how I made her feel. She liked the attention. She liked the reassurance. She liked having someone who consistently reminded her that she mattered. And for a while, that was enough to keep the connection alive. But attention alone can't build something real. Because the moment that attention stops, there's nothing holding the relationship together. And that's exactly what happened. Once I stopped constantly feeding the connection, it disappeared. At first, that felt like rejection, but now I see it differently. It wasn't rejection, it was clarity, because it showed me the difference between someone who loves you and someone who only loves the feeling you give them. And once you see that difference clearly, you stop blaming yourself for the way things ended. You realize you weren't losing someone who truly valued you. You were losing someone who valued what you provided. And that's not the kind of connection worth holding on to. One day I'll meet someone who doesn't just enjoy the attention I give them. Someone who actually cares about the person giving it. Someone who chooses me even when the excitement fades. Someone who values the connection, not just the validation. And when that happens, I won't feel like I'm constantly proving my worth, because the right person doesn't stay for the attention, they stay for you. She replaced me in a week, 7 days, and I've replayed that number in my head more times than I'd like to admit, because when something you invested months, maybe years, into gets swapped out in 7 days, it doesn't just hurt, it destabilizes you. It makes you question your perception, it makes you question your value, it makes you question whether what you had was ever real in the first place. I keep thinking about how we ended the conversations, the tone, the way she said she needed time, the way she said she had to focus on herself, and then a week later there's someone else standing where I used to stand. So what was the truth? Was she grieving while I was still loving? Was she detaching while I was trying? Was I the only one still emotionally present toward the end? Because you don't replace someone in a week unless you were already halfway gone. That's the part that keeps echoing in my mind. You don't wake up on Monday heartbroken and by Sunday decide you're ready for someone new. That's not healing, that's transition. And if she transitioned that smoothly, that quickly, then maybe I wasn't as permanent in her world as she was in mine. And that realization stings more than the breakup itself, because breakups hurt. But being replaced fast, that attacks your identity. It makes you feel temporary. It makes you feel interchangeable. It makes you feel like you were just holding a spot until something better came along. And I hate that my mind even goes there. But when someone replaces you in a week, you start asking dangerous questions. Was I not enough? Was I boring? Was I too available? Did she already have him lined up? Was I just comfortable, not essential? And the scary part is, your brain doesn't just ask those questions, it starts believing them. You start comparing yourself to someone you don't even know. You start imagining that he must have something you didn't. More excitement, more dominance, more money, more mystery, more something. And now it feels like you lost a competition you didn't even know you were in. But love was never supposed to be competitive. It was supposed to be intentional, chosen, protected, and if she could swap me out in 7 days, then maybe what we had wasn't as protected as I thought. Maybe I was fighting for something that was already slipping away. Maybe I was loving someone who had already emotionally exited, and that's the part that hurts the most. Not that she found someone new, but that she found someone new that quickly, because that speed tells a story. And I'm still trying to figure out what that story says about me. I think what really messed with me wasn't just that she replaced me, it was how effortless it looked, how natural she made it seem. Like I was just a chapter she flipped past without rereading, because I'm still here sitting with it, still replaying the last conversations in my head, still wondering if I missed signs, still trying to understand where it actually started falling apart, and she's already smiling next to someone new. That kind of speed doesn't just hurt, it humiliates you. It makes you feel like you were the only one emotionally invested at the end. Like while you were trying to fix it, she was already detaching. Like while you were thinking, we just need time, she was thinking, I need someone else. And the scariest part, I don't know which version of reality is true. Was she already talking to him before we ended? Was I slowly being phased out while I was still trying to show up? Or did she just move on that fast because she can't be alone? Every scenario hurts in a different way. If she was already lining him up, then I was loving someone who was preparing my replacement. If she just needed validation that quickly, then I was never the emotional anchor I thought I was. And if she genuinely didn't feel anything after it ended, then maybe I meant less than I believed. That's what a 1-week replacement does to your mind. It makes you question the entire foundation. You start rewriting memories. That time she seemed distant, that time she picked a fight out of nowhere, that time she said she felt confused. Now they don't feel random anymore. Now they feel like early signs of an exit. And the worst part is realizing that you might have been the only one still emotionally inside the relationship toward the end, because you can't replace someone in a week unless you were already halfway gone. And that's the sentence that keeps echoing. Halfway gone. Maybe she left emotionally months ago. Maybe I was loving someone who had already checked out. Maybe the breakup wasn't the beginning of the end. Maybe it was just the announcement, and that realization shifts the pain, because now it's not just heartbreak, it's feeling blindsided, it's feeling like you were operating on outdated information, like you thought you were both building, but she was already packing. And I hate that this makes me question my value, because logically, I know someone moving on fast doesn't define me, but emotionally, it feels like it does. It feels like I was replaceable, interchangeable, temporary, and nobody wants to feel temporary in something they treated as permanent. I keep thinking about how deeply I committed, how I shut down distractions, how I defended her when people doubted us, how I chose her repeatedly. And now it feels like I was the only one guarding something she was willing to trade. That's what makes it feel unfair. Not that she moved on, but that she moved on like it was easy, like I was just space that needed to be filled. And that's the dangerous thought, because I wasn't just space, I was time, I was effort, I was loyalty, I was presence, and if she could replace all of that in 7 days, then either she never fully valued it, or she never fully processed it. And I don't know which one hurts more, because if she didn't value it, then I misjudged everything, and if she didn't process it, then she's just distracting herself. But distraction still feels like replacement when you're the one left behind. And I'm left here trying to rebuild confidence that got shaken by a 7-day timeline, trying to remind myself that speed doesn't equal significance, trying to remember that depth doesn't get erased overnight, because if what we had was real to me, then it was real, even if she replaced it quickly. But still, 7 days. That number doesn't just represent time, it represents how fast someone can move on when you thought you meant more, and I'm still trying to figure out what that says about her and what it doesn't say about me. The part nobody prepares you for is how fast replacement attacks your confidence, not just your feelings, your confidence, because heartbreak hurts your chest, but being replaced quickly hits your ego, and ego isn't pride, ego is identity. It's how you see yourself, and when someone moves on in a week, your brain starts filling in blanks you never wanted to think about. You start comparing yourself to someone you don't even know. What does he have that I don't? Is he more exciting, more unpredictable, more emotionally unavailable, more dominant, more detached? Did she need someone less steady, less serious, less invested? You start dissecting yourself like you were the problem to be solved. And that's dangerous, because now it's not just about her moving on, it's about you feeling like you lost to someone else, like this was a competition, like you were weighed against another option and didn't measure up. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about. If someone can replace you in a week, they didn't replace you. They replaced the role, they replaced the attention, they replaced the space, they replaced the feeling of not being alone. But connection, real connection, that doesn't get swapped that quickly. You can substitute company, you can substitute validation, but you can't duplicate depth overnight. And I have to keep reminding myself of that, because when you see them laughing together, posting together, looking comfortable together, your mind doesn't care about logic. It sees images and it translates them into meaning. They're happier. She upgraded. You weren't enough. But images don't show history. They don't show inside jokes. They don't show late night vulnerability. They don't show how deeply you invested. They show a moment, and moments are easy to manufacture. Depth takes time, and if she replaced me in 7 days, then either she had already emotionally left long before we officially ended, or she doesn't process loss the way I do. And both are hard to accept, because if she left emotionally before I did, then I was loving someone who was already gone. And if she doesn't process loss deeply, then I was loving someone who doesn't sit with pain. She escapes it. And escape looks like replacement when you're the one grieving. I won't lie though. Part of what hurts is feeling disposable. Like I was just a chapter. Like I was just a phase. Like I was someone she needed for that season. And once it was over, I was easy to move past. But here's what I'm starting to understand. People who move on that quickly aren't necessarily healed. They're avoiding, they're filling silence, they're covering discomfort, because sitting alone after a breakup is uncomfortable. It forces reflection, it forces accountability, it forces grief, and not everyone has the emotional discipline to sit with that. Some people run straight into the next distraction, not because the previous person meant nothing, but because feeling nothing feels easier than feeling everything. And I need to remember that her timeline isn't a measurement of my worth. It's a reflection of her coping style. Still, that doesn't erase the sting, because I'm still here thinking about what we had. Still processing, still grieving, still reconstructing my confidence, and she's already building something new. That imbalance feels unfair, like I'm stuck in emotional traffic while she sped through the exit ramp, and maybe that's the hardest pill to swallow. Not that she found someone else, but that she found someone else while I'm still untangling myself from what we were. It makes you feel behind, like you're losing, like you're weaker for caring longer, but caring longer isn't weakness, it's depth, and depth doesn't reset in 7 days. So maybe the real truth is this: she replaced the position, but she didn't replace the impact. And if what we had was real to me, then it mattered, even if she chose not to sit in it, even if she chose speed over reflection. Because I would rather be the one who feels deeply than the one who forgets quickly. 7 days might look like replacement, but sometimes it's just avoidance in disguise. And one day, when the distraction fades, she might finally sit with what I've been sitting with this whole time, and by then I'll be further ahead emotionally than she ever was, not because I moved on faster, but because I actually processed it. And that's something nobody can replace in a week. The worst part about her replacing me in a week isn't even the new guy, it's the silence that came with it, because when someone moves on that fast, they don't just leave you, they erase you, the calls stop, the inside jokes disappear, the routine you built together vanishes, and suddenly the person who used to know your schedule, your moods, your patterns is giving that attention to someone else. That's what makes it feel unreal, because it's not just that she found someone new, it's that she redirected everything so easily. The same energy, the same time, the same effort, just different face. And that's when your mind spirals into the dangerous place. If she can give someone else what she gave me that quickly, was it ever special? That question hits hard, because we don't just want to be loved, we want to feel irreplaceable. We want to feel like what we built had weight, like it left a mark, like it couldn't just be swapped out like a profile picture. And when she replaced me in 7 days, it felt like I was lightweight, like I was something she could carry easily and set down just as easily. But here's the thing I keep wrestling with. Maybe it wasn't easy. Maybe it just looks easy. Social media never shows grief. It doesn't show reflection. It doesn't show confusion. It shows highlights. And maybe what I'm seeing is the highlight reel of her coping, because moving on quickly doesn't always mean you didn't care. Sometimes it means you can't sit still with pain. Sometimes it means you need distraction to avoid accountability. Sometimes it means you'd rather build something new than examine why the last thing broke. But none of that makes it easier to watch, because while she's building new memories, I'm still dismantling old ones. I'm still processing the last conversation, still remembering the way she used to look at me, still trying to figure out when it started fading. And that imbalance makes you feel like you lost twice. You lost the relationship, and you lost the race to move on. And I hate that it feels like a race, because healing shouldn't be competitive. But when someone replaces you in a week, it feels like you're the only one still standing in the wreckage, like she walked away from the crash without even looking back, and you're still checking for broken pieces. What hurts even more is knowing I didn't have a backup, I didn't have someone lined up, I didn't have a just in case. When we ended, it was just me in the silence, and I chose to sit in it, not because I wanted to suffer, but because I respect what we had enough to process it properly. So when she jumped into something new that fast, it felt like I was the only one honoring the history, like I was the only one treating it like it mattered. And that's a lonely feeling, to believe something was significant and watch the other person treat it like it was temporary. But maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe she didn't replace me. Maybe she replaced the feeling of being alone. Maybe she replaced the discomfort. Maybe she replaced the emptiness, because some people don't know how to sit with themselves after something ends. They need noise. They need attention. They need someone new to prove they're still wanted. And if that's the case, then her moving on in a week says more about her relationship with silence than it does about my value. Still, that doesn't stop the thoughts, because at night, logic fades and emotion gets loud. And in those moments, it feels like I wasn't enough. Like if I had been better, stronger, more exciting, more something, she wouldn't have moved on that fast. But I have to remind myself, you can be enough for someone and still not be there forever. You can love someone deeply and still not be what they're built to keep. And if she could replace me in 7 days, then maybe I wasn't meant to stay in her life long term. Maybe I was a lesson. Maybe she was mine. But what I refuse to accept is that I was insignificant, because I know how I loved, I know how I showed up, I know how I committed, and those things don't become meaningless just because someone else moved quickly. If anything, they prove something about me, that I invest fully, that I don't keep backups, that I don't treat people like placeholders. And maybe that's rare. Maybe that's why this hurts more, because I wasn't halfway in. I was all the way in. And when you're all the way in, being replaced feels like being erased, but I'm not erased. I'm just healing at a pace that reflects depth, and depth doesn't reset in 7 days. So yeah, she replaced me in a week, but that week doesn't define my worth. It defines her coping speed. And one day when she finally slows down, she might realize you can replace a person's position, but you can't replace the way they loved you. And that's something no one swaps out in 7 days. There's a different kind of pain that comes from being replaced quickly. It's not just heartbreak, it's humiliation. And I don't mean humiliation in a loud, dramatic way. I mean the quiet kind, the kind where you sit alone thinking, how did I not see this coming? Because when someone moves on in a week, it makes you question your awareness. Were there signs I ignored? Did she emotionally detach months before I noticed? Was I holding on to something that was already slipping through my hands? And that's the part that messes with your head the most. Because now it's not just about losing her. It's about doubting yourself, your intuition, your judgment, your ability to read people. You start replaying moments that once felt normal. That random argument, that night she seemed distant, that time she picked up her phone and turned it away slightly, that period where she felt off but said she was fine. At the time, you trusted her words. Now you question everything, because if she replaced you in 7 days, your brain automatically assumes she had a head start. And whether that's true or not, the damage is the same. It makes you feel like you were the only one fully in it, like you were the only one fighting for something she had already decided to let go of. And that imbalance feels like betrayal, even if technically it wasn't, because the emotional timing didn't match. You were still invested, she was already transitioning, and that creates this gap, a painful one, where you're grieving something she already processed, or avoided, or replaced, and it makes you feel late, like you're the last one to realize the relationship was over. And I hate that feeling, because I don't like feeling behind. I don't like feeling like I was operating with outdated information. I don't like feeling like I was loving someone who had already emotionally packed their bags. But maybe that's the reality. Maybe the breakup wasn't the beginning of her detachment. Maybe it was the end of it. Maybe she had already done her grieving while I was still trying to fix things. And that realization hurts in a different way. Because now it's not just that she moved on fast, it's that she moved on before I even knew we were done. And I'm stuck here wondering when it actually ended. Was it weeks before the breakup? Months? Did she slowly disconnect while I was still showing up? Because that's the part nobody prepares you for. The possibility that you were loving someone who was already halfway gone. And if that's true, then I wasn't replaced in a week. I was replaced long before that. I just didn't know it yet. But here's the thing, I'm slowly starting to understand. Even if she emotionally left before I did, that doesn't make me weak. It doesn't make me naive. It means I was committed. It means I was still trying. It means I was operating in good faith. And I'd rather be the one who stayed genuine than the one who quietly exited without saying it, because I know how I loved. I didn't keep options open. I didn't emotionally detach while pretending everything was fine. I didn't start building something new while something old was still alive. When I was in it fully. And if she replaced me in a week, then that says something about her capacity to detach, not about my capacity to matter. Still, that week will probably always sting, not because of the new guy, but because of what it symbolized, how quickly someone can shift focus, how fast attention can be redirected, how easy it can look to replace what felt permanent. But maybe permanence isn't about how long something lasts, maybe it's about how deeply it was felt. And if I'm still here processing it while she moved on fast, then maybe I was the one who felt it deeper. And that doesn't make me the loser. It makes me the one who actually experienced it. 7 days might have been enough for her to move forward, but it's not enough to erase what I gave, and I refuse to let her timeline rewrite my value, because being replaced quickly hurts, but being genuine never does. There's something else that hurts about being replaced in a week. It makes you question whether you were ever chosen or just convenient, because if someone can transition that smoothly, that fast, it starts to feel like you were just occupying space, like you weren't irreplaceable, like you were temporary comfort, and nobody wants to feel like temporary comfort. I keep thinking about the way she used to look at me, the way she said things like, I don't see myself with anyone else, the way she made it seem like what we had was rare, and now I'm sitting here wondering how rare something can really be if it can be replaced in 7 days. That's what makes it sting. Because rarity isn't supposed to be swappable, depth isn't supposed to be interchangeable. If something is special, it's supposed to leave a gap when it's gone. But her life doesn't look like there was a gap, it looks filled immediately. And that creates this internal conflict. Was I overestimating my importance? Did I romanticize something that was lighter to her than it was to me? Because when you care deeply, you assume the other person feels the same weight. You assume the attachment is mutual. You assume the history matters equally, but being replaced quickly makes you realize something uncomfortable. Not everyone feels at the same depth you do. Some people attach fast and detach faster. Some people build quickly and rebuild quicker. Some people don't see relationships as something sacred. They see them as something seasonal. And maybe that's the difference between us. Maybe I treat connection like something that deserves reverence, and she treats it like something that deserves momentum, because momentum doesn't stop, it just redirects, and that's exactly what she did. She redirected. The same attention, the same affection, the same emotional energy, just different recipient, and that's hard to swallow because it makes you feel like the container didn't matter, just the feeling. But here's the part I'm slowly realizing. If someone can redirect their attachment that fast, then maybe what they were attached to wasn't you. It was the feeling of being with someone. And that's not the same thing. There's a difference between loving a person and loving the experience of not being alone. And if she loved the experience more than she loved me, then of course she could replace me quickly, because she wasn't replacing a soul connection, she was replacing the role. And that hurts, but it also clarifies, because I don't want to be someone's role. I don't want to be someone's emotional placeholder. I don't want to be someone's for now. I want to be chosen with intention, held with depth, missed when I'm gone. And if she could swap me out in a week, then maybe I wasn't held the way I thought I was. But that doesn't mean I wasn't valuable. It just means she didn't hold me deeply. And those are two different things. Still, there's something about the speed that keeps echoing. 7 days. It makes it feel like I didn't leave a mark, like I didn't leave impact, like I didn't leave space. But I know that's not true, because impact isn't measured by how long someone stays single. It's measured by what they learned, what they felt, what they carry forward. And even if she doesn't feel it now, one day when the distraction fades, when the excitement settles, when she's sitting in quiet, she might finally process what she skipped, and by then I won't be waiting. Because here's what I'm starting to understand. Being replaced quickly doesn't mean you were insignificant. It means the other person couldn't sit with loss, and loss reveals maturity. If I'm still here processing, still reflecting, still rebuilding, then I'm not behind, I'm just doing it properly. 7 days might have been enough for her to move forward, but it's not enough to erase who I was, and I refuse to let her timeline determine my value, because I wasn't just someone she dated, I was someone who showed up fully, and that doesn't become meaningless just because someone else showed up faster. She replaced me in a week, but that week says more about her relationship with discomfort than it does about my worth. There's another layer to this that I don't talk about out loud. Anger, not loud anger, not screaming or crashing out, the quiet kind. The kind that sits in your chest when you realize how easily someone redirected what you treated like sacred. Because I stayed loyal, I stayed committed, I stayed focused, and she moved on in 7 days. That makes you question fairness. It makes you feel like you played the game honestly while someone else was already preparing their next move. And I hate that it feels like a game because I never approached it like one. When I was with her, I wasn't scanning the room for upgrades, I wasn't entertaining backups, I wasn't lining up options just in case. I was in it, fully, and now I'm sitting here realizing she either wasn't or she detached long before I knew. And that's what builds resentment. The idea that I was emotionally present while she was emotionally preparing. Because now it feels like I was loyal to a version of her that didn't exist anymore, like I was committed to something she had already mentally ended, and that realization stings. But here's where it shifts, because the anger starts turning into clarity. If she could replace me that quickly, then she was already disconnecting. And if she was already disconnecting, then the relationship wasn't as mutual as I believed. And if it wasn't mutual, then I wasn't losing someone who was fully invested. I was losing someone who was already halfway out. That doesn't make it hurt less, but it reframes it, because now it's not about me being not enough. It's about her not being anchored. Anchored people don't drift that fast. Anchored people don't swap attachments like playlists. Anchored people sit with loss, and if she didn't sit with it, then maybe she never held it deeply, and that realization hurts, but it also frees me, because I don't want someone who can replace depth with distraction. I don't want someone who needs constant attention to feel stable. I want someone who values history, who respects connection, who understands that what you build with someone isn't disposable. And if she replaced me in a week, then maybe I was disposable to her. But that doesn't mean I'm disposable in general. It just means she wasn't built to keep me. And there's a difference. Still, there's a part of me that wonders if she ever thinks about it, if she ever pauses, if she ever compares, if she ever realizes how fast she moved, but I can't live in that space, because waiting for someone to feel what you felt is a trap, and I refuse to trap myself in her timeline. 7 days, that's how fast she moved, but here's the truth. I'd rather take my time healing than rush into something new just to prove I can. I'd rather rebuild properly than distract myself temporarily, because I know what I gave, and I know how I showed up. And I know I don't need to rush into something new to validate that. She replaced me in a week, but I'm rebuilding myself at a pace that lasts, and that's not weakness, that's depth. You know what else being replaced in a week does? It makes you question whether you were ever truly seen. Because if someone really sees you, your patterns, your effort, your loyalty, your depth, they don't just slide into something new like you were a temporary rental. They feel the absence, they sit in it, they notice the difference, and I keep wondering if she noticed the quiet after I stopped calling, if she noticed the lack of consistency I used to bring, if she noticed that the stability I provided isn't something you just duplicate overnight, or if she just filled the silence so fast that there was no space to notice at all. That's what hurt, the possibility that I wasn't deeply registered, that I was experienced but not understood, because there's a difference between being with someone and truly knowing them. And when someone replaces you quickly, it feels like they never fully knew the weight of what they had. It feels like they liked the experience of you, not the essence of you, and I can handle someone not choosing me. But it's harder to handle feeling like I was easy to move past. I keep thinking about how careful I was, how intentional I was, how I didn't play games, how I didn't keep backups, how when things got hard, I leaned in instead of pulling away. And in the end, it feels like none of that slowed her down. 7 days. That number keeps echoing like a clock ticking in reverse, because for me, 7 days after a breakup feels raw. It feels heavy. It feels like I'm still adjusting to the silence, but for her, 7 days was enough to build something new. And that contrast makes you feel like you loved harder than you were loved. And that's a lonely realization, because loving harder isn't something you brag about. It's something you feel when the other person moves on faster, and you're left holding the emotional weight. But here's what I'm starting to see clearly. Just because she moved on quickly doesn't mean she processed it deeply. Speed isn't strength. Speed can be avoidance. Speed can be distraction. Speed can be ego protection. Sometimes people rush into something new not because the old thing meant nothing, but because it meant too much. Because sitting alone would force them to face what they lost, and not everyone is strong enough to sit in that kind of silence, and maybe I am. Maybe the reason I'm still here thinking, reflecting, feeling is because I actually let it hit me. I didn't numb it, I didn't immediately replace it, I didn't run from it, I sat with it, and sitting with pain requires maturity. It requires discipline, it requires emotional depth. So maybe this isn't about me being less valuable, maybe it's about me being more capable of processing, and that's not weakness, that's growth. Still, there's something about knowing she's creating new memories that stings, because those were supposed to be ours. The random laughs, the new places, the inside jokes. Now someone else gets that version of her, and I have to let go of the idea that it was only meant for me. And that's hard, but here's the truth I can't ignore anymore. If she could replace me in a week, then I was loving someone who wasn't built to stay long term. Because people who are built to stay don't detach that fast. They don't redirect that easily. They don't swap depth for novelty overnight. And I don't want someone who can treat connection like it's interchangeable. I want someone who understands the weight of history. Who understands that what you build with someone isn't disposable? Who understands that real attachment doesn't reset in 7 days? So yeah, she replaced me in a week, but I'm rebuilding myself in a way that lasts longer than a rebound ever will. And when I look back at this one day, I won't just remember the hurt, I'll remember the clarity, because being replaced quickly doesn't mean you were insignificant. It means the other person wasn't anchored, and I refuse to confuse someone else's instability with my lack of worth. 7 days might have been enough for her to move forward, but it's not enough to erase what I was. And one day, when I'm with someone who values depth the way I do, this week won't define me. It'll just be proof that I was never meant to stay where I was easily replaced. At some point, the hurt turns into something quieter. Not lighter, just quieter. Because you can only replay 7 days so many times before your brain gets tired of the echo. And when the noise slows down, clarity starts creeping in. I started asking myself a different question. Not why did she replace me so fast, but why am I measuring my value through her speed? Because that's what I was doing without realizing it. I was using her timeline as a mirror. If she moved on quickly, I must not have mattered deeply. If she looks happy, I must have been replaceable. If she didn't hesitate, I must not have left impact. But that logic is flawed. Her speed is not a measurement of my depth. Her distraction is not a reflection of my worth. Her ability to move forward quickly doesn't erase the way I showed up. And once I started separating those things, something shifted. Because I know how I loved, I know I was intentional, I know I was loyal, I know I didn't treat what we had like it was temporary. So if she did, that says something about her capacity, not my value. And I had to stop turning her coping style into my insecurity, because that's what I was doing. I was letting her rebound rewrite my confidence. I was letting her quick transition convince me I was forgettable. But forgettable doesn't leave you reflecting. Forgettable doesn't leave you rebuilding. Forgettable doesn't leave you questioning your own growth. What we had meant something, even if she chose not to sit in that meaning. And maybe that's the difference between us. I process, she replaces, I reflect, she redirects. I sit with the silence, she fills it, and neither is necessarily wrong, but one builds depth, the other builds distraction, and depth always wins in the long run. Because distraction fades, novelty fades, rebounds lose their adrenaline, and when that happens, whatever was avoided eventually resurfaces, and by then I won't be stuck in the same place, because while she rushed forward, I rebuilt properly, and rebuilding properly takes longer, but it lasts longer too. 7 days might have been enough for her to feel okay, but it wasn't enough for me to lose myself, and that's what matters. So yeah, she replaced me in a week, and for a while that felt like proof that I wasn't enough, proof that I was temporary, proof that I was easy to move past. But now it feels like proof of something else, proof that I love deeply, proof that I don't detach easily, proof that I don't treat connection like it's disposable. Because if I could have replaced her that fast and didn't, that says something. It says I value what I build. It says I respect history. It says I don't jump into something new just to soothe my ego. And I'd rather be the one who heals slowly than the one who forgets quickly. Because forgetting quickly doesn't mean you're strong. Sometimes it just means you're avoiding, and I don't want to avoid. I want to grow. I want to understand what worked, what didn't, what I tolerated, what I ignored. I want to rebuild my confidence without attaching it to someone else's timeline. She replaced me in a week, but she didn't replace my character. She didn't replace my loyalty. She didn't replace my ability to love fully. And one day, someone is going to experience that depth and recognize it immediately. Not treat it like a placeholder, not treat it like a phase, but treat it like something rare. Because rare things don't get swapped in 7 days. They get protected, so maybe this wasn't about me being replaced. Maybe it was about me being redirected away from someone who could move on that quickly towards someone who won't. 7 days hurt, but it also clarified. I don't want to be in a position where I can be replaced that easily ever again. And the only way to guarantee that is to choose someone who understands the weight of what they're holding, and next time, I will. I found out what she really thought of me, and I wish I didn't, because in my head, it was different. I thought she respected me. I thought she valued me. I thought the way I showed up actually meant something to her. But the truth, it wasn't what I believed, and it didn't come out in a direct way. Not a conversation, not something she sat me down and said. It came out indirectly, through things I wasn't supposed to hear, through how she spoke when I wasn't around. And that's when it hit me. The version of me in her head wasn't the same as the version of me I thought she saw. At first I didn't want to believe it because it didn't match how she acted around me. With me, she seemed calm, interested, like she actually cared. But what I heard didn't sound like that version of her at all. It sounded detached, like I wasn't that important, like I was just there. And that's what messes with you. When someone treats you one way to your face and thinks something completely different behind it, because now you don't know what was real, the way she talked to you, or the way she talked about you. And once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. Every memory started changing. Moments that felt genuine started feeling questionable. Things she said started sounding different in my head, because now I was looking at everything through a new lens, a more honest one. And the more I thought about it, the more it started making sense. Why sometimes her energy felt off. Why sometimes I felt like I was trying harder. Why something always felt slightly uneven. I just didn't want to accept it back then. Because when you care about someone, you don't want to believe they see you differently than you see them. You want to believe it's mutual, that the respect is equal, that the value is the same on both sides. But it wasn't. Not really. Because if she truly saw me the way I thought she did, she wouldn't have spoken about me like that. She wouldn't have minimized what I was giving. She wouldn't have treated my presence like something replaceable. And that's the part that hits your ego. Not in a loud way, in a quiet way. Because now you're not just dealing with losing her. You're dealing with realizing how little you meant in her perspective. While you were taking her seriously, She wasn't taking you the same way, and that imbalance, it hurts more than the ending. For a while I started questioning myself, like maybe I misread everything. Maybe I thought it was deeper than it actually was. Maybe I gave too much meaning to something that wasn't built to hold it. Because when someone sees you as less than what you believed, it makes you feel like you got it wrong. But here's what I had to understand. Just because she didn't value me properly doesn't mean I wasn't valuable. The problem wasn't who I was, it was how she saw me. And you can't control that. You can show up right, you can be real, you can be consistent. But if someone already has a limited view of you, they're going to treat you based on that, no matter how you show up. And that's why nothing I did changed it, because the issue wasn't effort, it was perception. Once I understood that, the pain started shifting, because now it wasn't about trying to prove something to her anymore. It was about realizing I was giving energy to someone who didn't even see it properly. And that's a different kind of clarity, because it makes you stop chasing, stop explaining, stop trying to be understood by someone who already decided how they see you. And honestly, I'm glad I found out, even though it hurt, because I would have kept going, thinking it was deeper than it actually was, thinking she valued me the way I valued her, and that would have kept me stuck. But the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, it frees you. So yeah, then I found out what she really thought of me, and it wasn't what I expected, but now I see it clearly. The right person doesn't make you question your value. They don't talk about you like you're nothing. They don't treat you like you're replaceable. They see you fully, clearly, and they move accordingly. So I'm not mad at what I found out. I'm just glad I didn't stay blind to it, because now I know one thing for sure. I'd rather know the truth than keep believing something that was never real. I don't think I was ever her first choice. Not really. At the time I thought I was. She talked to me every day. She laughed at my jokes. She told me things she said she didn't tell anyone else. And when someone gives you that kind of attention, it's easy to believe you're the person they truly want. So I believed it. I believed that when she said she cared, she meant it. I believed that when she chose to spend time with me, it meant I mattered. I believed that whatever we were building was real. But looking back now, there were small signs I ignored. Little moments where something didn't fully add up. Times where she seemed unsure about us. Times where her attention felt divided. Times where it felt like she was still searching for something, even while she was with me. At the time, I brushed those moments off, because when you care about someone, you don't want to believe you're just an option. You want to believe you're the decision. So I stayed patient, I stayed loyal, I kept showing up the same way every day. But the truth is, when someone sees you as their first choice, you don't feel uncertain about it. You don't feel like you're competing with invisible possibilities. You don't feel like their attention could shift at any moment. Being someone's first choice feels stable. It feels clear. And what we had wasn't always clear. There were moments where it felt strong, but there were also moments where it felt like I was trying harder to keep the connection alive. Like I was the one holding the weight of something she wasn't fully sure about. And I didn't want to admit that to myself, because nobody wants to believe they're someone's second option. But eventually the truth shows itself, not through words, through choices. And one day, her choices made something very clear. I wasn't the person she truly wanted. I was the person she stayed with until someone else felt like a better direction. And that realization hurts in a way that's hard to explain, because it doesn't just break your heart, it makes you question every moment that came before it. Once the idea entered my head that I might not have been her first choice, it was impossible to ignore, because suddenly memories started looking different. Moments that once felt normal started carrying a different meaning. I remember the times she hesitated when talking about the future, the times she seemed distracted when we were together, the times where her energy felt slightly distant, even though she was right there in front of me. Back then I didn't question it too much. When you you care about someone, you naturally assume the best about them. You assume the connection is mutual. You assume the effort you're putting in is being matched emotionally. But sometimes the truth sits quietly in the background while we convince ourselves everything is fine. And that's what it felt like when I started replaying those memories. Like the signs were always there, but I didn't want to see them. Because nobody wants to believe they're the backup plan. Nobody wants to believe they're the person someone stays with while they're still figuring out what they really want. But when someone truly sees you as their first choice, things feel different. There's clarity, there's certainty. You don't constantly feel like you have to prove why you deserve to be there. You don't feel like their attention might shift if the right opportunity appears. But with her, there were moments where I felt that uncertainty, and I kept pushing it away because admitting it would have meant admitting something painful, that maybe she cared about me, but not in the way I cared about her. And that's a difficult thing to face, because it means the connection wasn't equal. One person was fully invested, the other person was still deciding. And when one person is deciding while the other person is committed, the balance is already off. You're building something with someone who hasn't fully chosen you yet, and eventually that imbalance reveals itself, not through arguments, not through dramatic moments, through decisions. And decisions don't lie. One day, her decision made something very clear to me. I wasn't the person she was always sure about. I was the person she stayed with, while she kept wondering if someone else might be a better choice. When you start realizing you were never someone's first choice, the hardest part isn't the breakup. It's the realization that you were trying to win a place in someone's life that was never fully yours. Because when someone truly chooses you, you don't feel like you're competing with invisible options. You don't feel like their attention could disappear the moment something new shows up. You don't feel like you constantly have to prove why you deserve to be there. But with her, that feeling existed sometimes, not all the time, just enough to quietly sit in the back of my mind. There were moments where everything felt perfect. We talked for hours, we'd laugh like nothing else in the world mattered. And during those moments, I believed completely that I was the person she wanted. But then there were other moments where she seemed unsure, moments where her energy changed, moments where I felt like I was the one holding the connection together. And the strange thing about being someone's second option is this: they can still care about you, they can still enjoy your company, they can still appreciate what you bring into their life, but deep down, there's a part of them that hasn't fully committed, a part of them that's still wondering, still looking, still asking themselves if there's something else out there that fits them better. And that's a painful place to stand in someone's life, because while you're building something real, they're still evaluating it. You're investing, they're deciding, you're certain, they're uncertain, and when one person is certain while the other person is unsure, the outcome is almost always the same. Eventually, the person who was unsure finds a direction that feels clearer to them. And when that happens, the person who was giving everything suddenly realizes something heartbreaking. They were never the final decision. They were the temporary one. The moment I finally accepted that I was never her first choice, everything started making more sense. For the longest time, I thought the problem was something I did wrong. Maybe I didn't say the right things. Maybe I didn't keep things exciting enough. Maybe I should have noticed the distance sooner. Your mind does that when someone walks away. It starts searching for mistakes you could fix. Because if there's a mistake, then maybe there was a way to save it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't losing because I failed. I was losing because she was never fully choosing me to begin with. There's a big difference between someone being with you and someone being certain about you. At the time, I thought those were the same thing, but they're not. Someone can spend time with you. Someone can laugh with you. Someone can even care about you and still not see you as the person they're fully committed to. And when someone isn't fully committed, their heart stays open to other possibilities. That's where the uncertainty comes from. That's why the energy sometimes feels inconsistent. That's why you occasionally feel like you're trying harder than they are, because deep down, one person is already sure and the other person is still deciding. And when someone is still deciding, the moment another option appears, everything shifts, not because you suddenly became less valuable, but because they were never finished searching. Looking back, that's what hurts the most. Not that she left, but that I gave my loyalty to someone who was still questioning if I was the person they really wanted, because loyalty only feels safe when it's mutual, when both people are standing in the same place emotionally, when both people have already decided this is the person I'm choosing. But that's not what we had. I had already chosen her. She was still deciding if she should choose me, and eventually, she didn't. After that realization hit me that I was never really her first choice, something inside me shifted. At first it felt humiliating, because nobody wants to admit they were standing in someone's life as a possibility instead of a priority. You start thinking about all the effort you gave, all the time you invested, all the patience you showed, all the loyalty you carried for someone who wasn't standing on the same level of certainty. And the painful part is this: while I was building something solid in my mind, she was still deciding whether she wanted to stay. That imbalance is invisible when you're inside the relationship, because when you love someone, you assume the feeling is mutual. You assume they're just as sure as you are. But certainty has a different energy. When someone is sure about you, there's no hesitation, no distance, no quiet sense that you're being evaluated. They don't keep looking around. They don't keep wondering if something better might appear. They simply choose you, and they keep choosing you. Looking back now, I can see the difference where, with her, there were moments where everything felt strong, but there were also moments where it felt like she was slightly pulling away. Moments where the connection felt uneven. Moments where it felt like I was trying to hold something steady while she was still questioning it. At the time, I thought those moments were temporary. I thought if I stayed patient, if I kept showing up the same way, eventually she would feel as certain as I did. But certainty doesn't grow out of pressure, it grows out of genuine alignment. And if someone doesn't feel that alignment, no amount of loyalty can force it. That's the truth I had to accept. She didn't leave because I failed. She left because she was never completely convinced that I was the person she wanted to build her future with. And that realization hurts in a very specific way, because it makes you feel like you were standing in someone's life waiting to be chosen, while they were quietly considering someone else. The hardest part about realizing you were never someone's first choice isn't just the heartbreak, it's the way it makes you question your own judgment. Because when you look back, you start wondering how you didn't see it sooner, how you didn't notice the hesitation, how you didn't recognize the moments where her energy didn't fully match yours. But the truth is, when you care about someone, you don't analyze them like a stranger. You trust them, you take their words seriously, you assume the connection means the same thing to them as it does to you. So when she said she cared, I believed her. When she spent time with me, I thought it meant I was important to her. When we talked about things that felt personal, I thought that meant we were building something real. And maybe in her own way she did care. But caring about someone and being certain about them are two completely different things. Someone can care about you and still not see you as their future. Someone can enjoy being with you while still wondering if someone else might feel more right. And when someone is still wondering, you end up standing in a very fragile place in their life, because the moment something new appears, something that feels more exciting, more aligned, or simply different, their uncertainty starts leaning in a new direction, and that's what eventually happened. She didn't suddenly stop liking me, she just found someone she felt more sure about, and the moment that happened, everything changed. The attention shifted, the conversations faded, the connection that once felt strong suddenly felt like it was slipping through my hands, and in that moment I finally understood something I had been avoiding. I wasn't losing my place in her life, I was losing the position I never truly had. I wasn't the person she had fully chosen, I was the person she stayed with while she was still deciding. Once I accepted that I was never her first choice, another realization started settling in. I wasn't just hurt because she left, I was hurt because of what it revealed about the entire relationship. Because when you think someone chose you, you build your whole mindset around that belief. You become loyal, you become patient, you invest your time and your emotions because you believe the other person is standing in the same place as you. But when you realize they weren't, it changes how you see everything that happened before. I started noticing the imbalance more clearly, the moments where I adjusted my schedule to make time for her, the moments where I tried to fix problems because I thought the relationship mattered equally to both of us, the moments where I stayed calm and patient during times she felt distant. I thought I was protecting something meaningful, but now I understand something I didn't see then. I was protecting a relationship that she was still questioning, and when one person is protecting something while the other person is still deciding if they even want it, the outcome is almost inevitable, because eventually the person who's unsure finds something that feels more certain, and when that happens, the person who was investing everything suddenly realizes something painful. They were standing in someone's life waiting to be chosen by someone who had never fully chosen them in the first place. That's a difficult truth to accept, because it forces you to admit that the relationship meant more to you than it did to them. It forces you to admit that while you were building something in your mind, they were still exploring their options, and that realization hits your pride in a way that's hard to describe. Not because you hate the other person, but because it makes you question your own judgment. It makes you wonder how you didn't see the difference between being valued and being temporarily convenient. But over time, I started understanding something important. Being someone's first choice isn't something you should have to fight to become. It isn't something you should have to prove you deserve. When someone truly sees you as their first choice, it feels clear, it feels stable. You don't spend your time wondering if someone else might replace you, because they've already decided where they stand. And with her, that decision was never fully made, not in the way I thought it was. After enough time passed, the pain of realizing I was never her first choice slowly started turning into something else. Clarity, because once the emotions settle down, you begin seeing the relationship without the illusion you had while you were inside it. When I was with her, I kept thinking that if I just stayed loyal enough, patient enough, supportive enough, eventually she would see that I was the right person. I thought certainty was something that would grow over time. But real certainty doesn't need to be convinced, it doesn't need to be proven. When someone truly sees you as their first choice, they don't hesitate. They don't keep looking around. They don't treat you like a possibility they're still evaluating. They choose you, and that choice feels obvious. Looking back, I realized I spent a lot of time trying to earn a position that should have been natural. Trying harder, showing more patience, giving more understanding whenever things felt off, and at the time I thought that effort meant I was being strong, but now I understand something I didn't see before. You shouldn't have to fight to become someone's first choice. If someone truly values you, you won't feel like you're constantly proving your worth. You won't feel like your place in their life is temporary. You won't feel like their attention could shift the moment something new appears with the right person. that kind of uncertainty doesn't exist, and realizing that changed the way I looked at the whole situation. Because for a long time I thought losing her meant I lost something important, but the truth is I lost a position that was never fully secure to begin with. I was trying to build a future with someone who had never fully decided that I was the person they wanted to build it with. And once you see that clearly, the pain starts losing its power, because you realize something important. You didn't lose someone who was fully committed to you. You lost someone who was still searching. Once I finally accepted that I was never her first choice, something unexpected happened. The story in my head started changing. For a long time, I looked at the situation like I had lost something valuable, like someone had taken my place, like I had somehow been replaced by someone better. But when you step back from the emotion and really look at the situation, you start realizing something different. I wasn't replaced, I was simply standing in a place that was never fully mine. Because when someone truly sees you as their first choice, there isn't a long period of hesitation. There isn't a constant feeling that something might change. There isn't a quiet sense that they're still evaluating their options. When someone knows they want you, the energy feels different, it feels stable, it feels certain. You don't spend your time wondering where you stand. You already know, and the truth is, with her, I never fully had that certainty. There were moments where it felt strong, moments where the connection felt real, but there were also moments where something felt slightly off, moments where I felt like I was trying harder to hold things together, moments where it felt like she was still deciding how much of herself she wanted to give. At the time, I ignored those feelings, because when you love someone, you want to believe the connection is mutual, you want to believe the effort is balanced, but effort and certainty are two different things. Someone can enjoy what you give them while still being unsure if you're the person they truly want. And when someone is unsure, their heart is still open to other possibilities. That's what eventually happened. She didn't suddenly stop caring about me. She simply found someone she felt more certain about. And once that certainty appeared, my place in her life disappeared. At first, that realization felt humiliating, but over time it started feeling like clarity, because it reminded me of something important. You shouldn't have to fight to become someone's first choice. If someone truly values you, that position is obvious. Looking back now, the hardest part about realizing I was never her first choice wasn't the breakup, it was the lesson. Because it forced me to understand something about relationships that I didn't fully grasp before. Love isn't just about how much you care about someone. It's about whether that care is equally returned. You can be loyal, you can be patient, you can give someone your time, your attention, and your effort. But if the other person hasn't fully chosen you, none of that guarantees they'll stay. And that's a painful truth to learn, but it's also an important one because it changes the way you look at relationships moving forward. It teaches you that being someone's first choice isn't something you should have to earn through constant effort. It should be something they feel naturally, something they decide clearly, something they show through their actions. Because when someone truly chooses you, you won't feel like you're competing with invisible possibilities. You won't feel like their attention could disappear at any moment. You won't feel like you're just temporarily filling a space in their life. You'll feel secure, you'll feel valued, you'll feel chosen, and that's the kind of connection everyone deserves. For a long time I thought realizing I was never her first choice meant I had lost something important, but now I see it differently. What I actually lost was a situation where I was giving my loyalty to someone who had never fully decided they wanted it, and losing that isn't a failure, it's a redirection. Because one day I'll meet someone who doesn't hesitate, someone who doesn't keep looking for alternatives, someone who doesn't treat my presence like something temporary, someone who chooses me without needing time to decide. And when that happens, the difference will be obvious. Because for the first time, I won't feel like I'm trying to become someone's first choice. I'll simply know that I already am. Sometimes the question isn't, will I find love? It's deeper than that. It's, will someone ever choose me the way I choose them? Not temporarily, not when it's convenient, not when they're bored, but fully. There's a difference between being liked and being chosen. Liked is easy, chosen is intentional. And if you've been the one who always gives more, who stays longer, who loves harder, you start wondering if maybe you're meant to be the giver but never the one kept. You watch other people get picked without hesitation, publicly, proudly, confidently, and you sit there thinking, what is it about me that makes people unsure? Is it timing? Is it me? Am I too much? Not enough? And the scariest part isn't being alone. It's the thought that maybe you'll always be almost chosen. Being the almost changes you. You're not rejected loudly. You're not cut off dramatically. You're just not picked. You're the one they talk to every day until they meet someone else. The one they say they really like but never commit to. The one who's good enough to keep around, just not good enough to claim. And that messes with your head because there's no clear reason. They don't say you're lacking. They don't say you're the problem, they just hesitate, and hesitation feels personal. You start replaying everything. Was I too available, too understanding, too patient, or maybe not exciting enough, not mysterious enough, not whatever it takes to be chosen instantly? And slowly, your self-worth gets tied to someone else's indecision. That's the dangerous part. Because being the almost doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like you were close enough to hope, close enough to imagine it, close enough to get attached, but not close enough to stay. And when that keeps happening, you don't just question love, you question yourself. After being almost chosen enough times, you start adjusting yourself, not dramatically, not obviously, just subtly. You become a little less expressive, a little less attached, a little less honest about how much you care. Because maybe that's the problem. Maybe you're too available, too deep, too ready. So you try being cooler, more detached, more mysterious. You pretend you don't need reassurance. You act like you're fine with seeing where it goes. You downplay your feelings so you don't scare anyone off. But here's the truth. Shrinking yourself doesn't make you more lovable. It just makes you less visible. And the worst part? Even when you adjust, even when you play it safe, you still end up almost chosen, because the issue was never that you were too much, it's that you were giving depth to people who weren't ready for it. And instead of realizing that, you internalized their hesitation, you made it about your value, you thought, if I just change this one thing, maybe next time they'll stay. But love isn't unlocked by becoming smaller. It's aligned by being fully yourself and meeting someone who doesn't hesitate. And the sooner you stop reshaping yourself for someone's indecision, the sooner you realize you were never lacking. You were just misaligned. After a while, you stop expecting to be chosen, not because you don't want it, but because you're tired of getting your hopes up. So now, whenever something starts to feel good, you brace yourself. You tell yourself not to get excited, not to imagine too far ahead, not to believe it too much, because history has taught you how this usually ends. You assume they'll lose interest, assume they'll find someone better, assume you'll become the almost again. And that mindset is heavy, because you're not just protecting yourself, you're preparing for rejection before it even happens. You start reading into small changes, shorter text, longer replies, different energy. And instead of feeling secure, you feel on edge, not because they've done something wrong, but because you've been here before. You've felt the slow fade. You've watched interest turn into distance. You've experienced the shift from excitement to uncertainty. So now you expect it, and expecting rejection changes how you show up. You hold back, you don't fully invest, you act like you care less than you do, because if it falls apart again, at least you can say you weren't all in, but deep down, you don't want to live like that. You don't want to approach love like it's already ending. You just want one time where it doesn't. There's a difference between being unwanted and being unmatched. And if you've been the almost too many times, you start confusing the two. Unwanted feels personal, like there's something wrong with you, like you're missing some quality everyone else seems to have. Unmatched is different. Unmatched means the timing was off, the emotional depth wasn't equal, the intentions weren't aligned. Unmatched isn't about your worth, it's about compatibility. But when someone hesitates to choose you, it doesn't feel like misalignment, it feels like rejection. And rejection feels final. You forget that love isn't a competition, that being chosen isn't about being better, it's about being right for each other at the same time. You can be attractive, kind, emotionally available, and still not be someone's person. That doesn't reduce you. It just means alignment wasn't there. And the moment you stop asking, what's wrong with me, and start asking, were we actually aligned? Everything shifts, because maybe you weren't almost chosen. Maybe you were just never meant to settle for someone unsure. Here's something you don't realize at first. Your fear of not being chosen might actually be protecting you, because when you're scared of being the almost again, you start paying attention. You notice inconsistency faster. You recognize mixed signals sooner. You don't ignore hesitation like you used to. Before, you'd cling to potential. You'd fill in gaps with hope. You'd convince yourself that uncertainty just needed time. Now, you watch. You see when someone's energy shifts. You see when effort isn't equal. You see when you're the only one leaning in. And instead of begging to be chosen, you pull back. Not out of ego, not out of pride, but out of self-respect, because deep down you don't want to be chosen by someone who's unsure. You don't want to be picked after being compared, after being doubted, after being an option. You want someone certain. So maybe the real shift isn't asking, will I ever be chosen? It's asking, do I even want to be chosen by someone who hesitates? And that question changes everything. At some point you get tired of chasing certainty from other people. You get tired of waiting for someone to confirm your value, tired of reading into words, tired of hoping their actions will finally match. So something shifts. Instead of asking, do they want me? You start asking, do I even want this? That's power. Because when you become certain in yourself, you stop needing constant reassurance. You know what you bring, you know how you love, you know the depth you offer. And that confidence changes your energy. You don't beg, you don't overprove, you don't shrink to stay, you let people show up or not. And if they hesitate, you don't internalize it. You understand that someone else's confusion is not a reflection of your worth. You stop trying to convince people to choose you, because the right person won't need convincing. They'll recognize you, and more importantly, you'll recognize them. Not because they picked you, but because they're clear, consistent, and certain. And this time, certainty goes both ways. Here's the part nobody tells you. Being chosen starts with choosing yourself first, not in a cliche way, not in a I don't need anyone way, but in a real way. It's choosing not to stay where you feel unsure, choosing not to compete for attention, choosing not to lower your standards just to secure a spot in someone's life. Because when you don't choose yourself, you'll accept being almost chosen. You'll accept being an option, maybe placeholder. But when you decide you're not negotiable, everything shifts. You stop trying to earn love. You stop proving your worth. You stop overextending just to feel wanted. You realize something important. If someone has to debate whether you're enough, they're not your person. Choosing yourself means walking away even when you like them, even when there's potential, even when part of you hopes they'll change, because you don't want reluctant love. You want certainty. And the moment you become certain that you deserve that, you stop fearing the question, will I ever be chosen, because you already are, by yourself. Love feels different when you don't need it to validate you. Before, being chosen felt like proof that you were enough, proof that you were desirable, proof that you mattered. So when someone hesitated, it shook you, because it felt like they were confirming your worst fear. Now, love isn't proof anymore, it's a bonus. You don't look at someone's commitment as a measurement of your worth. You don't panic when someone pulls away. You don't chase reassurance like you used to, because your value isn't waiting on someone else's decision, and that changes everything. You approach love calmly, You enjoy it without clinging to it. You let it build instead of forcing it. You don't need someone to choose you to feel complete. You want to be chosen, yes, but you don't need it to feel worthy. And that shift is powerful because when love is no longer validation, you stop settling for almost. You stop trying to convince someone. You stop auditioning for a role in their life. You let them decide. And if they hesitate, you don't break, you move on. So, will I ever be chosen? Yeah, but not in the way I used to think. I used to believe being chosen meant someone finally seeing my value, finally realizing what I bring, finally deciding I was enough, but I see it differently now. The right person won't discover my worth, they'll recognize it immediately. There won't be hesitation, no comparing, no, I'm not sure what I want, it'll be clear. Because when someone is aligned with you, choosing you isn't a debate, it's natural. And here's the real answer to the question: I will be chosen when I stop entertaining people who are unsure. I will be chosen when I don't accept almost, when I don't beg for clarity, when I walk away from hesitation. Because being chosen isn't about being better than someone else. It's about being right for someone who's right for you. And until that happens, I'm not behind, I'm not lacking, I'm not unlovable, I'm just not settling. So yeah, I'll be chosen. Not by someone confused, not by someone temporary, not by someone half in, but by someone certain. And this time I'll be just as certain back. Sometimes I don't question whether I love people. I know I do. I love intentionally, I love in details, I love in the quiet ways that don't always get noticed. I remember the small things you said 3 months ago. I notice when your voice sounds slightly different. I pay attention to your moods without you having to explain them. If you're overwhelmed, I adjust. If you're distant, I check in. If you're hurting, I feel it too. So when I sit alone and that thought creeps in, am I actually loved the same way? It doesn't come from insecurity. It comes from imbalance, because loving someone isn't hard for me, but feeling consistently loved back, that's where it gets complicated. There's a difference between being wanted and being valued, between being chosen and being considered, between someone enjoying your presence and someone protecting your heart. And sometimes I can't tell which one I am. Am I loved, or am I just convenient? Am I loved, or am I just consistent? Am I loved, or am I just the safe option, the stable one, the reliable one, the one who won't leave easily? Because people say I love you all the time, but love isn't proven in the words, it's proven in patterns. Do you show up the same way on random days, not just when you're lonely? Do you care about my emotions when they're inconvenient? Do you notice when I go quiet, or do you only feel my absence when I stop giving? That's the part nobody talks about. You can be in a relationship, you can be talking every day, you can be physically close and still feel emotionally unsure, still feel like you're giving more than you're receiving, still feel like if you stop trying so hard, everything would fall apart. And if that's true, is that love? Or is that maintenance? I don't need constant reassurance. I don't need over-the-top affection. I don't need dramatic gestures. But I need to feel secure. I need to feel like I matter when I'm not performing strength. I need to feel like I'm loved even on the days I'm quiet, tired, distant, not at my best. Because real love doesn't just enjoy you when you're easy. It stays steady when you're human. And I think that's what scares me, the possibility that I'm loved for what I provide, not for who I am, loved for my stability, loved for my patience, loved for my understanding, but not deeply studied, not emotionally prioritized, not carefully handled. And if I'm being honest, I don't want half love. I don't want to be someone's comfort without being their commitment. I don't want to be someone's peace without being their priority. So yeah, sometimes I sit with that quiet question. Am I actually loved, or am I just really good at loving others? The hardest part about questioning love is that it doesn't always come from obvious neglect, doesn't always come from cheating or lying or someone clearly mistreating you. Sometimes it comes from subtle absence, from emotional gaps you can't quite explain, from feeling like you're standing next to someone but not fully with them. Because love isn't just about presence, it's about engagement. It's about whether someone studies you the way you study them. I ask myself things like, if I stopped initiating, how long would it take for them to notice? If I didn't send the good morning text, would they send one first? If I went quiet for a few days, would they check in because they care or because they're bored? And I hate that those thoughts even exist, because when love feels secure, you don't test it in your head, you don't calculate effort, you don't keep mental score, you just exist inside it peacefully. But when love feels uneven, your brain starts tracking patterns. Who apologizes first? Who makes more time? Who adjusts more? And that's when the doubt begins. Not loud doubt, quiet doubt. The kind that sits in your chest at night. The kind that makes you reread conversations. The kind that makes you wonder if you're asking for too much or just asking the wrong person. I don't want dramatic love. I don't want obsession. I don't want someone who can't function without me. I want someone who chooses me consciously, daily, not because I'm easy, not because I'm stable, not because I don't cause problems, but because they genuinely value me, because they care about my internal world, because they don't want to risk losing me through laziness or emotional distance. That's the difference. You can love someone and still be careless. You can love someone and still take them for granted. You can love someone and still assume they'll never leave. But being loved properly, that feels intentional. It feels protected. It feels like someone is actively maintaining the connection, not just enjoying it. And sometimes I wonder, if I pulled my energy back to neutral, if I stopped overcompensating, if I loved at the same level I was receiving, would it still feel strong? Or would everything start crumbling? Because if my effort is what's holding us up, that's not love, that's imbalance disguised as loyalty. And I don't want to resent someone for something I never addressed, but I also don't want to keep shrinking just to avoid conflict. I want to feel wanted loudly enough that I don't question it silently. I want to feel secure enough that I don't rehearse conversations in my head. I want to feel chosen in a way that removes doubt instead of feeding it, because love shouldn't feel like something you constantly measure. It should feel like something you rest inside, and until I can sit in it, without wondering if I matter the same way, I think that question will always echo softly. Am I actually loved, or am I just deeply loving? I think what makes this question heavy is that I don't doubt your feelings. I doubt your effort, because feelings are invisible. Effort isn't. You can tell me you love me, you can say it in the right tone, you can even mean it. But love that isn't maintained eventually feels like memory, and I don't want to live off potential. I don't want to survive off they care, they're just bad at showing it. Because if I can show it, if I can adjust, if I can communicate clearly, why does it feel like I'm the one stretching more? That's where the exhaustion comes in, not from loving you, from overcompensating for the space you leave. There's a specific loneliness that comes when you're the emotionally aware one, when you're the one who brings things up calmly, when you're the one who says, let's talk about it, when you're the one who makes sure small issues don't become big ones. And sometimes I wonder, if I stopped being that person, would you step into that role? Or would we slowly drift because I stopped carrying the emotional weight? That's not partnership, that's imbalance. And imbalance slowly turns love into doubt. I don't need perfection. I need reciprocity. I need to feel like if I fall apart, you won't just watch. I need to feel like if I go quiet, you'll notice. I need to feel like if I stop being strong for a moment, you won't become distant. Because love isn't just about who stays when it's easy. It's about who leans in when things feel uncomfortable. And sometimes I don't feel leaned into, I feel leaned on. And there's a difference. I don't want to be your emotional safety net without you being mine. I don't want to be the consistent one while wondering if I'm consistently valued. And maybe you do love me, but if I constantly have to question it, then something about the way it's being expressed isn't landing. Because real love doesn't eliminate all fear, but it does eliminate constant uncertainty. It doesn't make you feel like you're negotiating your worth. It makes you feel secure enough to stop asking yourself if you matter. And until I can sit in this without quietly measuring effort, without wondering if I'm too much, without shrinking my needs to maintain peace, that question will stay in the back of my mind. Am I actually loved, or am I just deeply convenient? I think the real fear isn't that you don't love me, it's that you love me comfortably. There's a difference. Comfortable love is quiet. It assumes. It relaxes a little too much. It stops trying as hard because it believes I'm not going anywhere. And maybe I won't, but that doesn't mean I don't notice the shift. In the beginning, effort feels automatic. You call just to hear my voice. You ask questions and actually wait for the answers. You care about how my day went, not just what happened. But once things feel stable, do you still pursue me? Do you still choose me loudly? Do you still protect the connection like it could be lost? Or do you just exist in it? Because love that stops being intentional slowly starts feeling optional. And I don't want to feel optional in someone's life. I don't want to be the person you assume will always understand, the person you assume won't leave, the person you assume doesn't need reassurance, because the strong ones still need softness, the independent ones still need consistency, the calm ones still need effort, and sometimes I think people forget that. They mistake my patience for infinite tolerance. They mistake my understanding for emotional immunity. They mistake my loyalty for permanence. But even loyal people get tired. Even understanding people feel hurt. Even calm people question things when the effort changes. I don't want to be loved lazily. I don't want to be loved based on convenience. I want to be loved actively. I want someone who doesn't just assume I know they care, but make sure I feel it. Someone who doesn't just stay, but stays with intention. Because here's the truth, if I ever stopped trying the way I do now, would you fight for this the same way? If I ever pulled my energy back to neutral, would you step up or would you get distant? That question alone tells me a lot. Love shouldn't feel like something I'm maintaining by myself. It shouldn't feel like if I relax for a second, everything will slowly fade. It should feel mutual, balanced, protected from both sides. And until I feel that consistently, not just in moments, not just after conflict, not just when I express doubt, that quiet thought will linger. Am I loved deeply or just comfortably? Maybe the hardest part about all of this is that I don't want to accuse you. I don't want to sound ungrateful. I don't want to seem insecure. I don't want to turn something small into something heavy. But silence builds pressure, and pressure turns into quiet resentment, because when I feel like I'm giving more than I'm receiving, I don't explode, I adjust. I overthink, I analyze, I start loving more carefully, and that's when something shifts inside me. I stop being soft in the same way, I stop opening up as freely, I stop expressing needs because I don't want to feel like a burden. And you probably wouldn't even notice at first, because I don't change loudly, I change subtly. And that's the scary part, because once I start protecting myself emotionally, I don't fully come back the same. I don't want to have to guard my heart with someone who says they love me. I don't want to measure my words. I don't want to calculate how much reassurance I can ask for without seeming too much. I want to exist freely. But freedom only comes when love feels secure, not intense, not obsessive, secure. The kind of secure where I don't have to question your effort after a disagreement. The kind of secure where your consistency doesn't depend on my mood. The kind of secure where I don't feel like I have to earn softness from you. Because love shouldn't feel conditional. It shouldn't spike when I'm easy to love and dip when I need extra understanding. And sometimes I ask myself something deeper. If I disappeared tomorrow, would you miss me because you love me? Or because you lost something that benefited you? Would you miss my heart? Or just my stability? Would you miss the way I cared, or just the fact that I cared consistently? That difference matters more than people realize, because I don't want to be someone's comfort zone if I'm not also their conscious choice. I don't want to be someone's safe option if I'm not also their priority. And I don't want to keep pouring into something where I feel like I'm the emotional backbone. Love should feel like two people holding it up, not one person carrying it quietly. And until I feel that weight shared, I'll keep asking myself softly, am I actually loved, or am I just deeply dependable? I think what I've realized is this: if I constantly have to ask myself whether I'm loved, then something inside me doesn't feel safe, because real love doesn't require constant decoding. It doesn't make you sit alone at night replaying conversations. It doesn't make you question your worth after small disagreements. It doesn't make you shrink just to maintain peace. Real love feels steady, not perfect, not dramatic, steady. It feels like someone who chooses you, even when you're not at your best. It feels like someone who reassures without being forced. It feels like someone who protects your heart, like it's their responsibility too. And maybe you do love me, but if your love makes me anxious, if it makes me overanalyze, if it makes me feel like I'm asking for too much when I ask for consistency, then it's not landing the way love should, because love shouldn't make you question your value. It should reinforce it. It shouldn't make you feel like you're lucky to be chosen. It should make you feel mutually chosen. Maybe the real shift isn't asking, am I actually loved? Maybe it's asking, do I feel secure here? Do I feel prioritized? Do I feel emotionally safe? Because love isn't just something someone says. It's something you experience repeatedly. It's in the tone, the effort, the consistency after comfort sets in, the way someone handles you when you're difficult, not just when you're easy. And if I'm honest, I don't want intense love. I don't want dramatic love. I don't want love that feels like a roller coaster. I want love that makes me stop asking this question entirely. Love that's so clear, so intentional, so consistent that doubt doesn't have room to grow. Because if I'm constantly wondering whether I'm loved, then maybe I'm not asking for too much. Maybe I just haven't experienced love that makes the answer obvious. And when I do, I won't have to ask. I'll know.